This is the final REFFOID episode. Take one. Welcome to the end of a journey. A journey of legend, a journey of fantasy. Ironically occurring at the middle part of a 3-part AAA gaming odyssey. Since March of 2021, I set out on this journey to review every Final Fantasy or I die. Now, there were some complications with what exactly every or die meant, but regardless, it has been a journey. A Goliath time sink spanning over 100 individual entries across various mediums and 80 video reviews that steadily increased in depth over time and required countless hours of writing and editing. But that overall journey is something I'm going to talk about in a later video. For now, we're here just to talk about the last step of the journey, the latest game in the 35-year franchise. And although it's just part 2 of 3, this can be argued as the biggest single-player Final Fantasy game ever made. So it actually serves quite well as a finale. Sorry this one took so long. I couldn't help myself but explore every inch of this world of fun. And that's exactly how I would describe it. A game whose number one concern is being fun for the vast majority of its enormous playtime, all the while leading you along with the trilogy's many, many mysteries. There is so much to get into, so folks, without further ado, let's enjoy one last ride. This is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I'm going to start by giving an overview of the story. This video will contain a warning before any sort of spoilery thing. You have the option to skip whatever chapter you want when it starts to get spoilery by simply skipping to the next one using YouTube's embedded feature. When you see this ATS symbol, that means we're entering active time spoil mode for the remainder of the video chapter. Start the next one, and the spoilers will be gone for now. There will be no spoilers for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in this chapter, though, since we're just going over basic story stuff, so you're safe for now. I will be spoiling the predecessor, though, Final Fantasy VII Remake, as it left us on an interesting note. So you've been warned. Okay, defeating the God of Fate, or whatever the heck that was, with the characters explicitly stating that the future is now unwritten, and our story can be changed now, led to 4 years of fan speculation about what that could mean. Remake had a fair amount of changes in certain scenes, but mostly it just added a lot of extra stuff. When I first played it, I had no experience with the original 7, and a lot of the references went right over my head. Yet the main story made total sense to me outside of not really being sure what Sephiroth was up to or who the heck the cat was in that one scene. Coming back after going through the entire compilation of Final Fantasy VII got me to see how meta everything was, how the Fate ghosts were working to keep characters on the path of the original story, and how the ending showed us an alternate timeline where Zack doesn't die, leading to the possibility of him reuniting with Cloud. Maybe some other key moments of the original story will be significantly changed in the future as well. But meta stuff aside, the story just ends with our party walking off into the great unknown in search of Sephiroth. Yuffie is tailing along after her private adventure in the episode Intermission DLC. Since she was an optional character in the original game, she didn't have very much significance on the story, so this new trilogy had to do a lot of work to make her fit as a real main character. Other than that, Remake covers such a relatively small amount of the original plot that we didn't even make it to Sephiroth's first backstory flashback exposition after that 40-hour game. We still don't know Sephiroth. Though I'll admit that that flashback serves as a really good opening to this game, so that's fair. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We gotta talk about a book. Oh, you thought book reviews were done? You thought we could get to the last episode without one more book review? No. If you watched my Final Fantasy VII Remake video, you might remember discussing Final Fantasy VII The Kids Are Alright, a Turk's side story. It was written before Remake was a thing, but it's still part of 7 canon, and Remake solidified that. But today we'll be talking about Traces of Two Pasts, a backstory novel about everyone's favorite girls, Tifa and Aerith, released and taking place between Remake and Rebirth. That's the important factor here. This has a much more direct influence on Rebirth, because as you can see, this is not a Final Fantasy VII novel. This is a Final Fantasy VII Remake novel. It canonically takes place during Rebirth. At some point in the beginning of the journey, walking across the grasslands, it's implied these stories are shared between the girls, often a significant distance behind the boys. And it's pretty meaty compared to other novels we've discussed. You remember the 13 one? The one that explains all that ridiculous lore and all the backstories to all the characters? That's about as thick as just the Tifa section of this one. So if you played Rebirth and never looked into this novel, you're going to find some interesting things in this part of the video. And I'm going to spoil it all. It doesn't spoil the game. This is all backstory. It all takes place before Rebirth and doesn't secretly spoil anything either. This is pure backstory. But I will spoil the book itself if you're planning on reading that still. So just fair warning, let's go. The first half, Traces of Tifa, is all about Tifa. Starting at childhood, hanging out in Nibelheim with all her friends. From the very beginning, we learn that Tifa has always had a problem with being too pretty. Not the worst problem to have, I suppose, but she's smart enough to realize that her 4 main crew of friends were all guys, and they weren't that interested in being her friend. Instead, they were competing to see who could get to date her first. Almost everyone she ran into would compliment her on her looks, and hanging around these guys all the time would make anyone feel a little undervalued. Like your good looks are the only thing you got. And we see Tifa get treated like that as an adult in the game. As with most FF7 characters, her childhood was tragic. When she was 8 years old, she lost her mom and would be raised by her dad, who tried his best but didn't do that great. But he did get her a white cat one day, who she named Fluffy. Tifa was always surrounded by people, but felt that no one knew her deep down. While her 4 guy friends were flirting with her, she had eyes set on the socially awkward kid who wouldn't talk to anyone, Cloud Strife, someone who she lived next to since forever, but rarely had a conversation with. Until one day, Cloud meets her one night at the water tower and, well, that whole scene plays, you know the one, where Tifa makes him promise to save her. It's kind of a different perspective than what we're used to. I always thought they were close childhood friends, but the book describes a period of separation between the two. Like when we first saw them meet on the water tower, that felt like a conversation between very close friends. But they apparently weren't that close. That was the first time Cloud said anything to her in a long time, according to her telling of the story. They were neighbors who saw each other every day, but didn't exactly know each other super deeply. The book also explores her relationship with Zangan a bit deeper as well. They have that master and pupil dynamic you would expect, and she even got her dad involved by using him as a sparring partner, which grew their relationship too. And we get the origins of the cowboy Tifa outfit. Apparently it was a hand-me-down. She got it one day when Fluffy ran away. Tifa was looking around Mount Nebel and ran into a Turk who convinced her to volunteer as a tour guide for that area. I don't know why though. As we know, that tour is where she reunites with Cloud and meets Sephiroth. To quote her, everything that happened after that was exactly as Cloud described. She lost Dad, she lost Fluffy, her home, everything in the Nibelheim fire. She woke up in the Sector 8 slums clinic, knee-deep in medical debt, and started the next chapter of her life, working to pay it off. This began the Steamed Buns arc, where she starts selling steamed buns for years. This particular part of Tifa's past was adapted via a side story in Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, so you can see the steamed buns action as it was meant to be seen. She meets Marl through this, and she meets Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie. Those three are important because they give her a friend to actually talk to, particularly Jessie. People her age that she can actually confide in a little bit. But this only lasts so long until one day they just stop talking to her. It's for her own protection as they start doing some secret Avalanche stuff. But this only causes her to go looking for them in Sector 7. There she stumbles upon 7th Heaven, reunites with Marl, and gets a new job there. She also meets Barrett and Marlene, who use the bar to hang out most of the day because they are homeless. It becomes a problem when they start to turn customers away because they smell so bad, and also Barrett is just generally scary. Eventually Tifa just can't watch it any longer and yells at them to give the damn child a bath and wash her clothes. So she's searching for Jessie, working with Marl and Barrett to run 7th Heaven, and making 1,000 steamed buns a day to pay off her debt, while keeping some money on the side too. But on Wednesdays, it's time to work at the bar. She loves the bar. She feels so fulfilled by it, making customers happy and acting as sort of a mother figure to Marlene. When the owner dies one day, Marl and Barrett feel like they have no choice but to close it up for good. That's when Tifa comes in with the spare money she's been saving for a rainy day. Today's that day. Even though she has a couple of years left to pay off the hospital debt, she's gonna use it to save the bar. While she's distracted by all this, Jessie actually ends up running into her. On the night there was supposed to be a big Avalanche meeting, Shinra was attempting to ambush. And Barrett has been looking for Jessie too because he wants to join Avalanche, so everything sort of falls into place. We get a little detail on the inner workings of the proper Avalanche, which I'm always curious about because, like, how big is this organization and where are they all? We don't learn about Avalanche very much. Jessie describes it as disorganized and non-committal. None of the subgroups are on the same page about what they should do, and whenever they all get together, it goes nowhere. More and more subgroups are splintering off into their own thing, but even Jessie, Biggs, and Wedge can't commit to anything, trying to plan their own team. That's when Barrett's like, well, you need a leader then, and that'll be me. And they're like, oh, okay. And they just go with it. Tifa remains close to them, but never formally joins Avalanche. Fast forward a bit, and Barrett gets tired of the other groups slacking, so they finally break off into the more radical Splinter Cell Avalanche we've come to know. And the finale of Tifa's story is discovering someone stole her money that she was going to use to pay for the bar. She tracks it down to the doctor who has indebted her for the past few years. Turns out, he took it to pay off someone who indebted him. After years of working her ass off, she finds out that her medical debt was being used to pay off a criminal who was needing the money to pay off his bets on chocobo races. Every conversation she had with her doctor got shadier and shadier. He inflated this bill 3 times more than she owed because of his debt, and he abused her trust and work ethic. And the criminal he's paying off turns out to be Tifa's boss from the steamed buns cart. All because he got greedy with chocobo gambling. So it ends with Tifa punching him in the face as hard as she can. Then he tries to get up to say, no, Tifa, I'm sorry I wasted years of your life. It's because I'm in love with you. And then she roundhouse kicks him in the face even harder. The end. But what an unfortunate summary of life as Tifa. Getting taken for granted while every guy she meets thinks they could just get with her anyway. I felt pretty bad for her. We knew a little more about Aerith's past already, so getting to see Tifa's backstory of getting screwed by life at every turn made me see her in a new light. But speaking of Aerith, it's time for her side of the novel. She tells this story while the crew is setting sail for Costa del Sol, a few chapters into Rebirth. We know this because the game directly indicates when this happens by copying exact dialogue from the book when her tale gets interrupted by the rest of the crew.
ever see that Faz guy again?
No, but there are times when I think I do, and I freeze up till I realize it's someone else.
I bet. I'm here if you want to talk.
Well, actually, I was kinda hoping we could talk business.
What kind of business?
You know, business. Boys.
Oh, that kind.
Shh.
It's me.
Meeting adjourned, for now.
Traces of Aerith begins with her and her mom breaking out of Shinra with the help of a guy named Faz, an employee who sympathized with them. But they only make it to Sector 5 station before she dies and Elmira takes her in. This gets us the backstory on the Gainsboroughs and their mafia-esque family business. Did you know Aerith was connected to the mob? The two of them deal with those troubles while Elmira waits for her husband Clay to come home from working as a Shinra soldier. He's not soldier, he's just a soldier. To stay secretive, Aerith adopts the name Rana, which they both agreed was a bad choice because there's another kid named that in the area, but they try to stick with it anyway. Almost every night, Ifalna, her mom who died earlier, visits her via the live stream to have a nightly chat. She can see all kinds of things through the live stream and she lets Aerith know, like she sees Clay dying in battle. So Elmira has to deal with this orphan she took in saying, "Oh, sorry, but he's not coming back. And I know this because I can see things and I'm an alien." Aerith meets and hangs out with the kids at the orphanage until the real Rana visits one day with her dad and brother Marcellus. At first they don't seem to care too much about the whole stealing your name thing until the adults go away and the kids are alone and they start to gang up on her. But in comes a kid named X, who starts beating up Marcellus until the dad comes back to break it up. This kid X, he didn't have a name, so they called him X, but he vowed to one day have the coolest name ever, which he eventually decided was Biggs. What a stupid origin story, but fine. Eventually, through these playground rumors and everyone being mad at her, Aerith's real name starts to spread around. So one day Elmira hires a bodyguard. Surprise, it's Sung. Sung comes to an agreement that they would watch from a distance until Aerith was old enough to tell them where the promised land is instead of just kidnapping her right there. And in between this, there's more drama with the mafia, the family business, and all that. Marcellus gets kidnapped and Aerith sees a vision of where he is. So they have to tell them we should go there without revealing why they know this because it would give Aerith away. Which of course leads to one of the wise guys thinking Elmira must have had something to do with this kidnapping because how else would she know where he is? And she gets in trouble. They're all like, if we just had a simple explanation to give the boss, we'd be okay. So Aerith's like, all right, I'm an alien who gets visions of people. And soon enough, the two of them get out of the business and don't see any of the boys again. But they lose the protection that comes with that. Years go by and tension builds as Elmira has to rough it and take any jobs she has without that support. Her entire life and everything she does is all for this girl she decided to take in one day. And they have a big fight about it, which leads to Aerith running away. She bumps into Faz while doing that. That's the nice guy who let them escape all those years ago. And he mistakes Aerith for Ifalna and confesses his love to her. One thing in common between these stories is a creepy guy who gets what he deserves. Elmira, just in time, rescues Aerith with a gun, and they head back home. That's all Aerith could tell Tifa before the boys showed up in Rebirth, but there's a smaller extra chapter to the novel called Episode 2, Coda. This section is about a number of other minor characters, starting with Dr. Donovan, who worked on Ifalna and started getting second thoughts about, killing the planet. He's trying to locate a man named Getty, but he ends up finding info about a Glenn Reiner. That's Glenn with one N, not Glenn Lodbrok with two N's. Glenn Reiner is a soldier who reportedly died from Mako poisoning, But why did he change his name from Getty? Back in the day, the narrator of this story worked as Aerith's playmate, like a designated friend that she could have as they studied her in Shinra. And as every man does in this book, he fell in love with her. We get backstory of the blooming friendship between Glenn, Lilissa, and Joanna. More characters who aren't important. They all passed out from Mako poisoning because Lilissa put it in the casserole she made. Now, I'm giving you the spark notes on this one, guys. Let's just skip through this. Episode 2 Coda has no momentum and was completely uninteresting and confusing about why this plot was even here. They throw a million new names at you, and all you're thinking is, I haven't heard any of these names before in the 7 universe, and there's only like 30 pages left of this, so I don't think I should get very invested. Plus, every few pages, the story breaks and jumps to a new setting with somebody else entirely, and it's hard for me to place like when these things even happen or if they're related at all. It's like they put a bunch of filler in to meet a page quota or something. But once in a while it comes back to Aerith and I get back into it. There's a small section where narrator witnesses Aerith awaken to the life stream for the first time during one of their playdates. She starts viciously drawing her visions and he gets super freaked out by it. Some of these drawings are seen on the mural in her room and we can observe them in 7 Remake. Soon enough, narrator finds the old friends he was looking for who were allegedly dead. They are actually alive, as he expected, but they're walking robed Mako zombies and Shinra kept it a secret. The poisoned casserole was a front all along. In the end, he tracks down Aerith too, selling flowers in her usual spot, but she doesn't recognize or remember him at all until he walks away and he sees her make a little face. I don't know what that means. He goes back to his wife after all this questing for repentance and tries to stop being so obsessed with Aerith. Couldn't be me. So this coda actually is pretty much unrelated to the novel. It was written before Remake even came out, and it was called Final Fantasy VII Remake Picturing the Past. I don't know why they decided to tack it to the end of this novel. Probably because it was adjacent to Aerith's backstory and her chapter was a little shorter than Tifa's on her own, but this didn't do anything for me. I didn't get anything out of it. It does not enhance the experience of playing either of these games in my opinion. Not a fan. Okay, so Traces of Two Pasts was very enjoyable, I thought. If you love these two characters, which we all do, this is a great way to get further invested into their backstories that are present in Remake and Rebirth, but also the original 7. I already cared about Tifa and Aerith. I didn't need more reason to, but I got it. And reading this right before playing Rebirth, as I was wrapping up my playthrough of the last game I reviewed, it really enhanced the experience. Every weighty scene was given much more weight as I thought in the back of my head, man, remember all that stuff Tifa already put up with just to get here? And what really surprised me was how many things were directly referenced in Rebirth. Things that are revealed only in this book are relevant to specific main story and side story scenes in the game. Plus, some parts being further canonized in Ever Crisis makes this book a true companion piece, not a throwaway side story. Final Fantasy VII The Kids Are Alright, a Turk's side story was retroactively made more relevant, but most of that book is still following characters and plot points completely separated from any game. Like I said in the beginning, this is not a Final Fantasy VII book, it's a Final Fantasy VII Remake book, and we'll go over how some other parts of it were relevant later in the video. I definitely recommend it, and I would love if they made another one for the 3rd game that we can read like as we wait for it to come out. But that last chapter, episode 2 Coda, you can skip that one, you're not missing anything. Okay, that's everything I had for a preamble. How about the dang game? If you played Remake already, you are familiar with the combat, the materia system, the character upgrading system, and even the structure of the side quest to a point. But everything in this game is tweaked just at least a little bit. That doesn't mean we're not going to discuss them exhaustively. But I want to start with an element that's brand new to Rebirth. The open world. The exploration. The part of the game that makes it so much bigger than the last one. Does it offer you with the same level of excitement and wonder as you felt when you left Midgar in the original 7 for the first time? Let's find out. 4 years have these characters been in stasis on this brown, sandy trail between Midgar and Calm as we waited for the next chapter of their adventure. Final Fantasy VII Remake's linearity was only rivaled by 10, the 13, and the third act of 15. The series itself isn't too familiar with the modern traditional idea of an open world game. 12 was pretty wide, but didn't have much to explore outside of hunts. 15 was more what we're talking about, but it wouldn't last the whole game, and 16 was open world, but still not quite what I'm talking about. I suppose I should define what I'm trying to mean when I say traditional modern open world. To me, it simply comes down to having stuff to do scattered all around the place. Challenges that range from small to large, items to find, possibly even secret areas. These are the qualities that let the player discover things at their own pace by their own choosing. In my 16 review, I talked a lot about how these parts were missing from that game's world and it suffered from it. Not every open game needs to play like this. You could go for the open zone style, which the 16 developers claimed to do, though I don't think they exactly accomplished that successfully either. 7 Rebirth, however, does all the things I look for in a traditional modern open world game. Although if I'm being greedy, I would ask for secret dungeons, caves, or other things to walk into and really discover. That's probably my number one ask if the next game decides to evolve the exploration further. For now, we stick almost entirely to the outside world, fitting after being stuck under the steel sky for those last 40 to 70 hours in Remake. They did not have to exert much effort to create a contrast between these two games, but they did. From the red rocks of Cosmo Canyon to the busy jungle of Gongaga, there's so much vibrance in this world. We do pay a small price, particularly in the faces of the character models. I remember seeing comparisons when the demo first dropped and I got kinda scared. Why does Cloud look so much worse on the PS5 than he does on the PS4? I hope they're not cutting corners. They obviously didn't, I can see that now. The scope of this world is just so much larger and more fast-paced that stuff like that has to be sacrificed, especially in running in performance mode. Anyone who actually drops the money on a PS5 Pro should see if we get Cloud's pretty face back. It still wouldn't be worth it though. Though I guess it's worth saying, of all the games updated for a boost on PS5 Pro, Rebirth seems to be getting a lot of great reviews. So if you're into that sort of premium experience, I still don't think it's worth it, but there it is. On the PS5 Unprofessional, models can be a bit twitchy and the overall game feels slightly less polished than the very controlled environment that was Remake. You can feel things slip out of the developer's hands a little bit now that there's so much more freedom in the player's hands. But these differences are hardly noticeable unless you just played Remake right before this. So the world is not exactly seamless. There's technically 6 major separated areas with their own completion bars for you to fill out, courtesy of Chadley. Oh, Chadley, were you a fan of Chadley? You better be, because he's almost an honorary party member now. He's your helper character, basically living in your pocket and being able to chat with you whenever he decides via this little communication device he invented. Thanks, bro. He also invented himself a friend, so now he has one friend. This is Mai. She's basically a girl version of Chadley put here so they can bicker about stuff for comedic effect. I don't know who told them to triple down on Chadley content, but whatever. She talks to you sometimes through the controller. This is what you PC gamers are gonna miss out on. They are helpful in the way they manage the exploration side of the game. Every task you accomplish fills their world intel meter and rewards you with points that you can exchange for materia that can only be found in these Chadley shops. There's some really good materia here, and it's just a nice reward on top of what you already get for doing mini quests and stuff. So let's talk about those. Unlike Remake and 16, Rebirth uses the throw everything at you at once method. It presents a challenge right from the start. Your next main quest is at the other side of the region. How much willpower do you have to get there in a reasonable time without getting all OCD and visiting every shiny point on the map? The answer for me was, let's just say I'd take around 6 hours minimum to get to that main quest. First, there's combat challenges. Fight a unique group of enemies while fulfilling 3 conditions, usually pressuring, staggering, and defeating them within a time limit. Then there's these tiny collectible challenges, finding life springs, which give you lore, chocobo dig sites and secret caches where you gotta find the hidden treasure. Basically, there's nothing you can do that won't end up being marked on the map, save for some extra secret digging locations. When every icon is painted gray, you've 100%ed the area. My need to see progress bars fill all the way up is why my playtime is so huge. But that's just the small stuff. The real fun comes with the bigger side quests and the minigames that fill out the rest of the world. We'll get to those later because I'm trying to stay on track and talk about one thing at a time. It's really hard to do because there's so much happening. This is absolutely the game where, as a completionist, you set your sights on one objective in the distance only to get distracted by every point of interest in between. Especially when one of those points is an intel tower. If you know what I'm talking about when I say traditional modern open world game, you know what these towers do. They reveal the map around you in a certain proximity and distract you with even more points of interest. It's been a staple video game mechanic since, I don't know, everyone says Assassin's Creed. You know, let's talk about this real quick since I believe this is the first time these towers have shown up in Final Fantasy. I never understood why people get so mad at towers, often referring to them as Ubisoft towers in a derogatory way. They're so quick to call basically every traditional open world game a Ubisoft game, and that's very harsh. The formulas of this one mechanic are similar, but the execution is the difference. Ubisoft games all share the same similarities down to the mission types. They feel processed and churned out with a new skin slapped over the last one depending on the setting of whatever the next one is. That's how they released yearly Assassin's Creed games for a solid decade. So when people diminish a new game that clearly has way more heart put into it than any Ubisoft game just because it has towers, it bothers me. They did the same thing with Breath of the Wild. They turned Zelda into a Ubisoft game. You see those towers? Like, come on, man. There's nothing wrong with putting intel towers in your open world game. They're an intuitive way for your players to learn how they're gonna manage an area. I'm not even gonna say Rebirth does anything to make them special, but they serve a purpose, and I like them. You can see and hear the love poured into this game through the environments and the hundreds of beautifully orchestrated tracks that play in every moment of the game. They couldn't even put all the songs on the official release soundtrack. There are songs made to only appear one time for one specific quest that never appears again. Oh wow, I just got really distracted again. Let's get back on track. You know what really hit me hard about the exploration in this game? Your whole party is here. You could have 2 people following you in 12 and 13. You had 3 in 15, but that was hardly a party. In Rebirth, there are 6 characters running around behind you the entire journey. I loved looking back behind me while I was running to be like, are they still there? They'll probably go away when I get on a chocobo. Nope. Everyone gets a chocobo as well, and you can go extremely fast if you sprint on one of those things, and they stay speeding behind you, the whole squad. It just got me good, you know. We've come a long way since the main character had to absorb all their friends every time you wanted to walk around. The speed you can move on a chocobo is really crazy. Coming off of Final Fantasy XVI, which frustrated me with its slowness, I was so happy to see this team prioritizing getting the player around. My favorite thing about exploring Rebirth is how easy it is. Those aforementioned towers in most games serve as your main teleport points, and there might be some other waypoints for you to unlock as you discover them. In Rebirth, you have chocobo stops for that purpose, but you can also teleport to literally any point of interest on the map. There's even an option to spawn in already on your chocobo for that instant takeoff. When I say 16 was bogged down by the developers who were too used to making an MMO intentionally designed to keep players slow, this is what I mean. In every aspect of 7 Rebirth, I feel the developers' goal was to give the people what they want. It's a huge game, and you can get anywhere in seconds. And they still have room to make traversal fun. Each of these 6 areas introduces its own special way to move around. You can climb 90-degree walls in Junon. You can glide in Cosmo Canyon. You could shoot a beam of water out of your butt and fly over the Sea of Nibel. I never got tired of exploring, so I did it until everything was uncovered and Chadley was happy. With all these modern new ways of getting around, you might be wondering if there's any point in adapting the car from the original game. There's not really a point to it anymore. You can get around fast enough with a chocobo, plus to make it work in a realistic 3D environment, you'd have to make it large and bulky to squeeze the whole party in there. And that is exactly what they did when they designed the entire open area of Corel around driving this monstrous vehicle. I told you, this isn't about what makes sense, it's about giving the people what they want. Rebirth's sheer indulgence is probably its strongest quality. Driving this car was objectively less convenient and practical than the Chocobo, but I still did it because I want to drive a big car and I want to hear the crew talking in the back while I do it. Traveling on foot isn't even bad either. It feels faster than you were in Remake, which makes sense. Definitely faster than 16, which didn't even let you sprint on command. Alright, I'm gonna stop mentioning 16, I think you get the point. Still no jump button for 7 fans. Well, not really. You can jump when the game decides you can when faced with some elevated ground, but otherwise that's it. There is no free climbing or anything crazy. And although we have so much speed thanks to the power of the PS5, there's still just a few parts of the game where you have to squeeze through a small area to load the next one. We're so close to being done with those, I can feel it. Finally, there's one more tiny piece to the exploration, even smaller than battle challenges and treasure. Item transmutation. Just another thing for you to do while traveling between things. You can transmute items using little pickup materials constantly spawning on the ground. Now before you think, oh, not another tacked on crafting system, I'll say, maybe it's a bit tacked on, but it's so simple and convenient like everything else that I'd be surprised if it bothered any crafting haters out there. Being accessible from the pause menu made it something I rarely thought about until towards the end when I was checking off the last few things I needed. See, I rarely care about crafting either, but what I liked about this one was it had its own progress bar. You can fill it a little bit whenever you craft something new for the first time, and the more you level up, the more rarer, nicer recipes you unlock. At max level, you get access to some pretty nice accessories. Completionists out there will be overwhelmed, but also very excited to see the amount of progress bars in this game. The obsessive compulsion is real, and if that's the sort of thing that doesn't make you excited and actually bothers you, you might not enjoy this game as much as some others. Most everything I talked about so far is optional, so if you choose, you can ignore the open world part and run straight to the main quests. Then you're basically playing 7 Remake style. Ironically, the game with much more side content doesn't ever force you to stop and do side quests the way the first one did. And if you're gonna miss 7 Remake's dungeon chapters where you explore a linear map while forced to use certain party members, don't, because they still have those in this game. They're really helpful in terms of the game's pacing. Sprinkled throughout the main story in between giant maps are dungeon chapters, towns to explore, lots of cutscenes, and mini-games. Ooh boy, we'll get to the mini-games. I've talked for a while about open world exploration, but that's far from all 7 Rebirth has to offer. We're gonna move on, but I have 2 complaints. The first one is partially my fault, but it's this game over screen. Return to title screen is obvious, but me and a number of other players got screwed with these other 2 options. I mistakenly thought retrying from checkpoint would send me to the last phase of the fight, or something like that. Last battle, if taken literally, would be the battle before this current one, so checkpoint seemed reasonable. My heart sunk when the screen popped me back to Bill's ranch in the blink of an eye, and I opened the map to see everything was unexplored. I jumped back 6 hours of gameplay. I wish I recorded myself scrambling in the menus, but I was too flustered to think about that. Luckily, there was an autosave from only 30 minutes ago. I still lost progress, but my god. If checkpoint means the last time you saved the game, don't call it a checkpoint. Call it a save point, like every other game. So that's when I realized retry from last battle means this battle. Grammatically frustrating, but fine. I also learned that this was patched by the time I got to it, and the original screen was even more confusing. Retry from before current battle. Okay, that makes more sense actually. Retry from this battle. I guess that will just reset the fight instead of making you walk through and skip the cutscene? Retry from before battle. I don't know. Who chose the wording for this? You could lose 6 hours of progress over this. And you may be thinking, Tom, why did you go 6 hours without saving? It's because I'm already spoiled by the PS5 Instant Resume feature. The Instant Resume feature of both current gen consoles is probably one of their best features, allowing you to turn on the console select the game, and immediately pick up exactly where you stopped, bypassing all menus and loading screens. It's pretty amazing, but this is your reminder that it can never replace excessive saving. My other complaint about the exploration is a much more legitimate one. Does anyone feel like this map kinda sucks? At first I loved how pretty it was. So much detail, but over time I realized why most games just give us that blue wireframe look. It's a utility, it doesn't need to be pretty. The prettiness too often gets in the way of navigation. There's nothing indicating if you're above or below a structure. I struggled to figure out where things were more times than I care to admit. And funny enough, during the dungeon chapters where depth isn't really important, it goes back to the blue wireframe style. This problem became most apparent in Gongaga, easily the most aggravating area in the game. The traversal gimmick is mushroom jumping, but the mushrooms just send you on a predetermined path, all different heights and distances. So I could be running around a small area trying to see how I missed a climbable rope or something, but the only way to get there is a mushroom 100 feet away. The jungle is beautiful, but it's so busy and hard to see important climbable things sometimes. The other areas are much wider and more open. I think this game has a genuine problem with verticality. And another thing, speaking to the completionists again, the fog of war is the worst. Most open world games hide areas on the map until you visit them via a fog of war. Breath of the Wild did it in a slightly different way, climb a tower and then that whole segment of the map is unveiled. The fog on 7 Rebirth's map is only tied to the player's actual location, so you have to scrub the whole place clean on foot if you want to reveal everything. This means you're likely going to end up with tiny specks of fog left over all over the map. To put it lightly, this makes me want to die. One of the areas is just a big empty ocean with nothing much to see. This is when you'll find out just how obsessive you are. Are you able to ignore the unpatterned lines of exploration, or will you be compelled to drive back and forth, up and down until the map is all cleaned up? Guess which one I did. I know at least one person out there has got to be feeling my pain. What's worse is some areas are inaccessible because, the giant mountain is blocking the path. It's all just for decoration, but on the map, they're still covered by the fog of war. Early on, I figured I'd unlock some way to get over the huge mountains, but no, it's just fogged up forever. It's fogged up beyond belief, if you ask me. Why would they do this? Probably because it looked prettier, like a more realistic world. But that's the problem with this map. It's supposed to be a tool, not a painting. They sacrificed usability for looks, and that's lame. Reminds me of the ridiculous orbital character upgrade tree from the previous game. At least they revamped that. I suppose we can talk about character growth next then, why not? The general idea of Folios, the new way to upgrade characters, is pretty much the same as that weird orbital thing they did last time, but it's no longer tied to weapons. Not entirely, it's actually character based now, and it's a normal looking skill tree, thank goodness. You can buy folios at certain shops, earn them through mini-games, side quests, or by increasing your party level. Yet another thing that goes up for exploring and getting Chadley intel. It's not anything all that exciting. You get stat boosts, extra abilities, new limit breaks, and synergy abilities, the hot new combat feature we'll get to in a bit. You can give each character special elemental attacks that don't consume MP, which sounds like a great way to have type coverage without taking too many materia slots up, but in practice these moves do so little damage that they could never take the role of a good old magic move, and that made them basically worthless. You're gonna have so many more abilities this time around that you're not gonna know what to do with them all. It's actually getting hard to manage. Weapon proficiency works exactly as it did last time. You find a new weapon and are then tasked with successfully executing its attached ability to its best potential. Then by doing so, you gain the right to use that ability on any other weapon. It's not only a great way to learn how they work, but it's fun to approach battles differently based on the ability you're currently training. I loved the system in Remake, and I'm glad to see it back. There's also a new trait for each weapon in the form of weapon skills. This gives you a choice between some nice passive abilities that usually synergize with whatever move that weapon came with. I wondered if anything was going to carry over from Remake. I had fantasized about being able to bring save data to Rebirth so you could keep your materia and weapons. Obviously that wouldn't work. This is a new game and things are balanced differently. I was at least hoping there'd be some canon reason for losing your stuff. Nope. They just give you a few materia and start you at level 15. Which implies that that's how strong these guys were when they slayed the God of Fate. The new max level is 70 instead of 50 in the last game. I'm sure we'll be able to get to 99 in part 3. Overall, the character building process is the same, but more, and I got no problem with that. You still have your accessory slots for everyone with many more options, and a lot of new materia earrings. Basically a max level materia that takes up an accessory slot rather than a materia slot because they knew it was going to be much harder to manage in this game. Oh man, let's talk about materia. Once again, it's the same but more, and I do have a problem with that. Managing materia in Remake was kind of annoying, switching them one by one when you switched your party during certain scripted sequences like the big robot fish boss was annoying. But it was only at a few points in that linear game. Most of the time you just had 3 people with you and they kept whatever materia was on them. In Rebirth, you're working with 7 party members and the freedom of switching them around whenever you need. The weapons have more slots and there's 50 unique kinds of materia. Some of which you want to have triple of to make sure you have them for multiple characters, and you gotta manage leveling all of them up individually. So, did they improve the materia managing system at all to compensate for this? Nope. You still manually swap these dots one by one. It's gone from kind of annoying to a problem. It actually dissuaded me from using characters evenly because whenever I thought, maybe I should try Red 13 with this boss, I would then think, I gotta switch over all my materia then, never mind. It's the one thing that brought a full stop to gameplay because I wanted to be sure I was leveling up everything I wanted, all the important ones, you know? So if you ever want to switch for just a second, it still completely stops the game. I suppose you don't have to swap all the materia around, but it feels wrong to have nothing, and with the AP needed to max out some of these, you're gonna want to be as efficient as possible. I tried to be, but even at the end of my absurdly long playthrough, I was missing a bunch of max levels I would have liked to own for post-game fights. They had to have recognized that this is a problem. Maybe they assumed people would build out each character's materia slots on their own, regardless of whether they're in the active party or not, so whenever they swapped characters out, materia swapping wouldn't be an issue. But that couldn't be more inefficient. You'd never see anything max level with that method. You're splitting your resources way too thin. Maybe they intended for materia maxing to happen on a second playthrough, but I don't buy that either. Remake's materia pacing was perfectly fine. There's no way they intended for you to have more than 3 characters built out at any time. That's just not how this system feels like it should work. And that's the annoying thing because the solution is very simple. Let the character have pre-built materia setups the same way you would in a deck building game, and then be able to assign that build to any character at once. I know that the character's slots will always vary between each other, but just have it fill whatever slots it can, right? Give a warning saying, hey, you can't fit all these, so choose the one to be left out, or something. It's not that complicated. This is probably my #1 request for the next game. With Sid and Vincent joining the party, that brings us to 9 total members. They just barely fit 7 on Rebirth's screen. Are you telling me we're gonna have to scroll down to swap between everyone? If something isn't done about this, it's just gonna be even more tiresome in part 3. So come on, developers. I heard the 16 team watched YouTube reviewers to figure out what needed to change in the DLC and later updates. Maybe someone's watching out there, maybe. But that's enough ranting. Let's talk about the cool materia that they added. Fans of the original had a lot to miss in Remake, but Rebirth adds a bunch more to the pile for you to strategize with. Protection and deprotection spells are here, strength and magic buffing, and the very useful re-raise. I would know. There's more attack spells such as gravity and comet, plus combo materia. These give you 2 spells for the price of 1 to save space, but more importantly, to link 2 spells to the same blue materia. Most of the extra gimmicky materia is found by doing Chadley's World Intel quests. There's Morph, which turns small enemies into items, which is funny. Limit Siphon, which takes limit bar gains and siphons them to your teammates instead to build them faster. Jump if you want to be a Dragoon. Dark Side, which boosts your attack but makes you lose HP for using them. And I wasn't crazy enough to try using it, but they threw in the stat swapping materia as well, like HP MP swap. So you basically die in one hit but can spam magic as much as you want. You'll be rewarded for changing up your build long term, especially if you plan on tackling post-game fights. First Strike materia is huge now, given the combat's emphasis on setups. Summons return, of course, still with their own materia slot and over-the-top fights to obtain them. More on that stuff later. You'll be leveling up the same way you did in the last game, but sometimes over the course of the story you'll find materia that's slightly pre-leveled. It's nice to run into, but sometimes makes you feel like you wasted effort leveling something up just before finding a pre-leveled one later, though I suppose it never hurts to have a few more copies. Enemy skill materia is back, but you learn the skills differently. You now get them from completing special arena challenges courtesy of Chadley. In Remake it worked more like the original game, run into enemies and have them use the power so you can copy it. It ended up being pretty annoying since Remake was linear, so you'd have to slog through a whole chapter just to find the one enemy with the skill that you missed. But if they kept that system the same in this one, it would have made more sense since you travel the world and can face any enemy you want kinda whenever you want. And secluding the skills to an arena mode would have made much more sense in Remake, not Rebirth. So both games are reflecting this incorrectly against their own design. It should have been an arena thing in Remake and it should have been an open enemy thing in Rebirth. Because Rebirth's open and Remake's not. It is not really a complaint about Rebirth, it's just that I thought it was funny. I have one complaint though. Can we not have Assess be a materia anymore? Assess is the ability you use to scan enemies, show their weakness, their immunities, and what it takes to stagger them. Extremely useful, I'd say necessary information. If you played Final Fantasy XIII, you know what I'm talking about. But this is a core mechanic to so many RPGs. And what they all have in common is this move is usually built in. But in Remake and Rebirth, it's an equipable materia that's taking up a slot for, let's be honest, the entire game. Entering a battle realizing I didn't bring Assess is like getting caught with your pants down. What do you even do now? Assess is one of those materia they made into an accessory slot as well, so you can equip it there instead if that helps. But for me, that meant Cloud couldn't have any other accessory the whole game. It's annoying. If it's so important to your combat system, why is it optional? There's another request for part 3. Just have Assess be a built-in ability. Just forget the materia. What's the point of that? So yeah, the materia system could be better. I still enjoy the freedom it presents. The characters are all unique on their own, but adding materia on top can settle them into a role that you create and are able to tweak, and that's fun. Next, we should talk about just how unique each character is, and how playable party members from the last game were changed. I didn't think I'd have much new to say about the combat system since I gushed a lot about it when I reviewed Remake, but there are a lot of changes, small and large, that make Rebirth even more interesting. Active time battling, freely attacking to build ATB, staggering enemies and increasing the multiplier as much as possible before hitting with your hardest moves. That recipe remains the core of the 7 Re trilogy. But in Rebirth it stands hand in hand with the synergy system. We were all speculating on how the teamwork double up mechanic from intermission would work in the next game, if they would even carry it over. Well, they kinda did, but kinda didn't. It was reworked. You can't double up team members to have increased abilities here. Instead, each pairing of characters have a couple of moves they can perform when they're together. Aerith can warp Cloud over to be a bodyguard, Barrett can throw Tifa at people, etc. And these moves don't use ATB. That's nice. They don't cause a lot of damage, but it's just a few additional moves that you can access depending on your party build that changes each time, which is cool. But I honestly didn't use them too much. I was usually busy focusing on building my ATB, because using an ATB bar grants 1 credit towards a synergy ability. All of these synergy things are unlocked via the Folio character upgrade trees, and the abilities are real game changers. They're almost on the level of limit breaks, dealing various amounts of damage. In that sense, they aren't much different from each other, but who's in your party determines which of the 4 synergy effects you'll have access to. Once you build 3 points with a pair of characters, the move is usable whenever you want, and then it increases in cost with each subsequent use. If you can plan around it, you can build up to one pretty fast, way faster than a limit break. The first type of effect splits your ATB bar into 3 instead of 2. I rarely found much of a use for this, especially because it's limited time. I can see it being helpful for storing even more firepower to eventually deal at a staggered enemy, but in my experience, this never lined up nicely. The second effect is increased stagger time, but it only works when the enemy is staggered. It's useful, but you'll realize after a couple attempts that the animation for this ability is so long it basically negates the time extension. Like, you're better off just storing ATB and actually dealing damage during the whole stagger period instead of wasting half of it increasing the timer for it. Like, it's an oxymoron. So the key strategy is to fill the stagger bar almost all the way, then use this ability to cause the stagger, getting the best of both worlds. Timing is everything. It's still all about getting that perfect storm moment. The third effect is temporary infinite magic. I don't think this needs an explanation. My god, this is incredible if you time it right. Remember Aerith's arcane ward, which allows characters within the zone to double cast every spell they used? That move is in this one too. So enough said. While my DPS usually does that, I like to have Aerith cast Re-Raise on every party member. That's a 35 MP spell used 3 times at no cost to me. Everybody gets a free revive. So yeah, that effect is a game changer. The last effect is limit level up. Through Folio upgrading, you can unlock 2 additional limit breaks for each character. They're almost all direct upgrades, but you can only use them by leveling up your limit mid-battle with this ability. I don't know if I even saw everyone's level 3 move, because it's pretty difficult to get to, but the reward is very worth it. Make your biggest attack even bigger, and then make it even bigger again. So for the synergy effects themselves, 2 of them are incredible and 2 of them are just okay. But I think the value in this system is what it adds to the average battle, adding another thing for you to manage and try to sync up to have that coveted perfect storm. What we used to think was the perfect storm moment where everything lined up in the last game is now so much easier to get. It's nothing compared to all the mechanics you can line up at once in Rebirth. It adds to the chaos and makes every fight that much more engaging. I love it, and I hope they can expand it even further next time. The only problem with it is, unlike limit breaks, you can still take damage during the animation, which can completely destroy your plans. Like, if one of you dies while you're doing this move, you lose those bars that you built up and the move doesn't trigger. It's awful, and the person dies, so you're just screwed. So there's still the opposite extreme of the perfect storm, that moment when you're still in the middle of recovery, healing and lacking ATB, maybe trying to revive somebody right as you happen to stagger the enemy, and you have nothing good to deliver. That time is just wasted. You failed. It feels real bad. Side note, I was already wowed that you could roam this world with your full party walking with you, and this carries over to combat too. Kind of. Characters who aren't in your front-end party of 3 will still be seen trying to assist from a distance. They don't do anything meaningful, but I really liked that detail. The developers were committed to making the experience seamless and immersive, but there's still a mechanic that does allow the outside party to intervene during emergencies. If 2 of your 3 die and you have enough synergy points, you can use a synergy move with someone on the back end. It's a huge help in a pinch. So you can see how Rebirth took Remake's battle system and put just even more emphasis on setups. Like, you're not exactly always actively fighting. A lot of the time, you are just making your characters stronger and stronger so you can deliver the hugest blow possible. And that emphasis trickles down to the individual characters as well. Let's talk about how each of them plays. Everyone feels more unique than ever. Remake already vastly improved on their individuality in battle thanks to weapon abilities. In the original, it was all about materia, and the decision on who to use was mostly about stats and limits. In Rebirth, they double down on making the characters unique. You're going to choose a character almost entirely because of their gimmick. Every character now has some move that just makes them better at what they do. Some self-buffing setup move that vastly improves their damage output or fills a gauge faster. I rarely used to care about any items in past Final Fantasy games that boost your ATB at the start of battle. First Strike Materia, Hermes shoes, stuff like that. Because when it comes to long boss fights, the benefits of those items are reaped at the beginning and then do nothing for you for the rest of the fight. Why equip an item like that when I could instead boost my strength for 10% for the entire fight, you know? But Rebirth puts such an emphasis on building yourself up within each battle that I found myself giving all 3 of my party members something to get them going faster at the start. Aerith in particular is so slow. She's like almost worthless without a Radiant Ward. So being able to cast that immediately when the battle begins makes a massive difference for the rest of the fight, because she can start building ATB at a much higher rate, and it puts me on the fast track to what I'm always planning for, the big stagger moment. High level Rebirth combat is all about speed. getting on track by setting your characters up, and staying on track by making good use of each stagger moment while also keeping your health up. If you fall off the track, it's difficult to come back, but you can do it, and your palms are gonna be sweaty by the end. The combat in this game has everything I loved about Remake's dynamic party switching and synergy, but doubles down on it by adding an additional layer of complexity and freedom in the literal synergy ability system, while also adjusting characters' fighting styles and throwing in a ton of new moves to give each of them a good reason to be picked for any given battle. And yet, I will still not play as Cait Sith. So Cloud, he can use Prime mode, which is like an even better Punisher mode, a way to deal a lot of damage without even using abilities. They gave him Blade Burst projectiles sometimes too, which is nice. Barrett can load his gun with consumable ammo that packs a bigger punch, and eventually unlocks a one-time use move to massively boost his ATB charge rate, and is the only character that can get that buff in the whole game. Tifa is kind of left the same. She's still the stagger boosting machine, and no one else can do it like her. But now, instead of Unbridled Fury, she has Unfettered Fury as well. The former increases her damage and the latter increases stagger. So you use that one in the beginning while you're building stagger and then switch to Unbridled when it's time to strike. She still charges ATB the fastest too, she's still OP. Yuffie still has her giant explosion attack that takes 6 ATB uses to charge all the way, and she still has the freedom to enhance her attacks with any element she wants. She was built like this so she could still be versatile as basically the only playable character in the DLC she was introduced in. So now that she's part of a team, I was fully expecting a nerf here, but no, she's one of the best damage dealers because of this. You can clone yourself too, and your clone will use a copy of spells you cast, and you can use Aerith's Arcane Ward to double it and hit enemies with 4 spells at once. You could just do that. And when it comes to Aerith, I mentioned her Radiant Ward a second ago, she's probably the most tweaked character out of the bunch. At first I thought, what did they do to her? She's so slow and she barely gets ATB. Her special triangle move used to charge up an AoE attack, but now that's done with square. Her new triangle special is a Ward Warp, instantly sending her to one of her wards. Well, I say instantly, but it's definitely not instant considering how many times I've tried and failed using it to get out of a sticky situation. So they turned her into a ward girl, and I grew more attached to that idea as I went on. Like I said before, Radiant Ward is simply a must-use. Every aspect of Aerith, her dodge speed, her damage, her stagger, her charge attack, are all vastly improved when she stays in the Radiant Ward. It's so good. She's got the Arcane Ward you know and love, and now an ATB Ward, which boosts other characters' ATB when you use stuff within it. She's very versatile. I like stacking as many wards as I can on top of each other. It's a lot to set up. She is a slow burn character, but she becomes monstrously powerful. With Transcendence, she begins charging a huge attack in the background. It's another thing for you to set up as early as you can to be ready for that stagger moment. So Aerith might be tough to handle, but she's well worth the effort. Everyone else plays comfortably familiar with a touch of new stuff to spice things up. It's as fun as ever. But we have some new blood, don't we? Red 13 technically joined the party in the third act of 7 Remake, where it was just too late to make him actually playable. Now he's here in all his glory. He's a fast boy and probably the best dodge speed / distance in the game, making him great as support. He was always about buffing and debuffing, so they made him excel on that side. His triangle special activates Vengeance mode, which only works if you build the meter up. You can do that by blocking attacks successfully and countering with a follow-up spin. This is his thing he needs to set up. While in Vengeance mode, your speed increases, your damage increases, your stagger increases. Red becomes a beast. It even gives you access to new and upgraded old abilities. My favorite one grants haste to all allies. Ooh, I just love haste. Stardust Ray is your big 2-bar consuming damage move, but there's also Reaper's Touch, which deals drastic damage the lower your HP is. His debuffing boosts come from his Folio upgrade tree and weapon skills. So he can be great support, but he's nothing to scoff at as a damager too. Red was fun to use, but the main thing holding him back for me is that Vengeance mode is kinda hard to charge up fast. Other characters tend to charge themselves up through their abilities, but you have to block attacks for vengeance, so you must rely on enemies to first choose to attack you, and second, use a move that can be blocked, and third, you actually need to block it. I usually get too busy using my other two characters that I forget about vengeance mode, and it's too late before the stagger moment. Or I just charge it up like a tiny bit and then use it to use the haste all move and then go back to using the other characters. So I still think he's good and rewards skill more so than the other characters, but I honestly didn't use him that often. He's not the only newcomer here though. Cait Sith is also here, aka that random cat they showed on screen for 5 seconds in the last game. I was definitely most curious about how he was gonna play. How is he even gonna look or sound? He sounds pretty close to how he was in Dirge of Cerberus, but I'd say this new voice is much better. No offense to the last guy.
What? Good gracious me! What in the blazes is growing down there?
Usher of souls.
It's Nero the Sable! Oh dear!
Cait Sith, fortune teller extraordinaire. Put it back up.
As for looks, they've made the probably smart decision to not have him roam the world on the big Moogle plush. He's a little cat, and he runs on all fours. But they didn't rob us of finally seeing that fat Moogle in fuzzy texture 4K HDR. This was shocking to see when it was first revealed after decades of it being a white blocky guy on the PS1, reduced to one image in one version of Advent Children and completely gone from Dirge. This is what I mean when I talk about how this game spares nothing and indulges in itself and makes people happy. People were speculating if the character would be reworked to just make more sense, but no, I don't believe the developers even considered that. Cait Sith is a robot cat who rides an autonomous giant stuffed toy with magic powers. That's how it was, and that's how it's gonna have to be. So in battle, as you might assume, he plays bizarrely. He's like Rosalina and Luma in Smash Bros. You gotta spawn Fat Moogle with an ability, and then he goes off fighting alone for a period of time, tanking hits and dealing damage. Cait is very weak on his own. He shoots these crappy musical projectiles through a horn, because again, he technically used horns as weapons in the original, so they have to translate that somehow. His triangle ability lets you hop on the Moogle and start dealing damage a bit faster, and while you're on the Moogle, the triangle transforms into a different move, and I don't know why it changes to whichever move. It might just be random because that's this character's deal, but you can get some really useful stuff like stopping the enemy, or you can get something worthless. My struggle with Cait Sith is figuring out how he fits into a battle, how he fits into a party. He is awkward to play, just doesn't feel very good. And he doesn't work that well as a damager or a support. The main gimmick with his moves is RNG. Roll the dice and get a random good effect. Maybe. An attack move whose damage can either be pretty high or 0. You can turn the Moogle into a time bomb that blows up somewhere out of your control, if you want, but it rarely works in your favor. Cait Sith is just not reliable by nature. Fits with the character, I guess. And I know that was his gimmick in the original, so that's his gimmick now. I seem to remember never using Cait Sith at all in my run of the original game. I used him a bit more this time. I really gave him a shot for a few fights and brought him back to unlock all his moves, but I eventually could no longer justify using him over literally anyone else. Like, he's not good. He's got one great move that lets you use a random summon ability from whoever is equipped to you. Normally this can only happen within a certain one-time window of a fight, so that's pretty awesome. His Moogle Punch is really damaging too, but that's just the one damage ability, that's the one. Everything else he can do is just not worth going through all the games that come with the territory. I avoided Cait Sith again whenever I could. There are a few 6-man arena battles that require you to set up 2 teams of 3. Cait Sith was always the one left out. Sorry, buddy. At least you have Fat Moogle to keep you company. Hey, I know this is probably brought up by so many people, but what is actually up with that thing? What is Fat Moogle? Are you telling me Moogles look like this when they get fat? Or like, It's a variant species of Moogle they decided to call Fat Moogle because they're also white and fuzzy. Is this plush even based on a creature that exists? Was it just invented by the Gold Saucer marketing team? How have we never seen another Fat Moogle in the history of Final Fantasy? I'm sorry, that's all I can think about when I play Cait Sith. I don't know why it bothers me so. But that is all 7 playable characters in Rebirth. Cid and Vincent are in the same boat Red was in the last game. They show up too late to be playable. Other than all that stuff I just talked about, Rebirth basically plays the same. So, whatever you liked about Remake is probably not going to change. But anything you didn't like about Remake is probably not going to change either. I voiced my opinion on the stun lock thing already in that video, though recently I've been picking up on a common complaint that the combat is too reliant on assess. While I do think it should just be a built-in move instead of a materia, I disagree with people who think assess removes any depth that the system might have. These guys say that every battle boils down to scan enemy, exploit weakness. It doesn't require much thought from the player. This opinion bothers me, because they say it about every RPG with a scan system. It's commonly brought up with 13 too, and 13-2 too. But they don't give it enough credit. Sure, some small enemies are just going to be weak to fire, so you use fire and they die, but bigger fights require a lot more of you. The assess thing just tells you what to do. I can see how that can be bothersome, but you know what bothers me about so many RPGs? When they require similar strategies to defeat a boss, but there's no way to know what to do other than trial and error. Is that what you want? Is that what this game is missing? More trial and error? When people say this combat system has no depth, even with all its moving parts I just talked about, I wonder what Final Fantasy games they're comparing it to. It obviously has more depth than 15 and 16, and 13 too, and 13-2 too. If we go back to the 2D games, aren't most of those fights just spamming your strongest attack and healing when you can? Every now and then you'll encounter a kill this trio in a certain order fight, or a kill all of them at the same time or they respawn fight. If they're any more complicated than that, it gets to be a problem for the player to actually figure it out without hints. And some of these games give the hints too. It's just not via a usable move from the player. The PS1 titles have more going on, but I still don't understand how anyone would prefer the original 7's combat to this. Kinda makes you realize that if you want to make all your boss fights feel unique, it's an extremely difficult thing to accomplish without a system like this just to flat out tell the player what they need to do. And look, the challenge doesn't come from what to do, it's how you're gonna do it. Rebirth definitely upped the complexity in some of these bigger fights. Look at this scorpion guy you just find in the wild. Dealing enough damage with ice magic attacks will pressure them. Following up with fire attacks will leave them open to attack. While pressured, they will become more susceptible to physical attacks, but more resistant to magic. You see, like, these are not complex things, but within a battle, it forces you to think on the fly and do something different with every mid-size enemies you encounter. Most of the small ones are very simple, but they need to be simple. There's a lot of enemy variety in this game, and all of these descriptions from Assess give you new strategies you have to figure out. It's fun. There's also a perfect block and parry mechanic now, because every action game needs that. And there's so much to think about. What am I going to prioritize? Who's going to need buffs the most for this particular fight? What synergy ability should I work towards? In a tough fight, I find myself staying in the slow motion menu to gather my thoughts, usually when my party's health is low or when only one is alive. I gotta take a deep breath and go, okay, this is salvageable. And when I scrape together a plan to make a comeback that works, it feels so awesome. And there's one more addition for those looking for more of a challenge. Rebirth has dynamic difficulty. Very helpful in an open world game where enough side quests can make you way stronger than you're supposed to be. Turning on dynamic difficulty scales enemies with your levels, so you need not worry about being too overpowered. Remember when Final Fantasy VIII did this and it sucked? Luckily, the scaling makes sense in this one. I played on dynamic mode for 100% of my playthrough. I recommend you do the same. And in case you're wondering, hard mode does return here again after beating the game. Playing without the privilege of MP restoration is a really fun challenge, extra fun when you use all your stuff from your previous playthrough in New Game Plus. But okay, we've been way too analytical so far in this video. Let's get wacky. It's finally time to talk about everyone's favorite, or least favorite, part of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The minigames! Setting this straight from the get-go, I'm pro minigame. What's up with the minigame haters? What do you hate, fun? Alright, well, maybe not all of them are the most fun, but I just love variety in games, and Rebirth oozes variety, partially thanks to all these minigames. Do you really want a 100+ hour game to be all combat? Come on, give me a silly minigame to play in between all the serious stuff. After all, Final Fantasy VII is as silly as it is serious. The developers seem to have deliberately made excuses for themselves at so many points to add minigames in. The original game was famous for all its minigames, but Rebirth alone, I think, has even more. Too many, some would say, but not I. And it makes sense for this third of the story, since the Gold Saucer is absolutely the centerpiece of this adventure. The Gold Saucer is the pinnacle of overindulgence in this trilogy's design philosophy. It might be my favorite part of the game. Either that or Costa del Sol, which they turned into another hub area for minigames. How much time should I dedicate to talking about minigames in this review? Well, if Rebirth wants to indulge as much as it does, then my review of it will do the same. I'm going to review every minigame in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I want to talk about all of them in quick succession so I can communicate the scope of this side of the game. And I figured the most fun way to do that would be to rank them all. I'm only counting games that are somewhat separated from the main gameplay story, so the box throwing stuff with Kate Sith doesn't really count. Neither does the photo taking quests or wheelie roundup. Those aren't really mini games. Arena doesn't count either because those are just battles. And with those exceptions, here are the top 22 minigames in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I hope I didn't forget any. Number 22, the worst one, which wasn't actually so bad, but I'll probably go with The Return of the Muscle Bros. A rehash of a minigame found in Final Fantasy VII Remake with the same idea of pressing the buttons in fast sequence until the UI goes away. There's a couple new added tricks, like having to press one of the buttons multiple times before the line keeps moving, but I just had my fill of this last time and I didn't need to go again. Like in Final Fantasy XVI, they made sure to use the PS5's adaptive triggers whenever they could, and this is probably the most noticeable use of them. The best way I can describe it is it feels like you're actually working out, but just with your index fingers. As if you were using tiny dumbbells. Replaying this over and over to go for the record time seriously made my fingers tired, and that's immersion. Is it worth getting arthritis? Probably not. Number 21, Chocobo Flag Racing. Just run into all the flags as fast as you can. It's a glorified tutorial. Nothing interesting about it. Number 20, Chocobo Catching. Your standard stealth minigame. You basically have to get to the end of the course without being seen by any chocos by walking behind minecarts or assaulting them with rocks. It's pretty slow and uneventful. Number 19, Chicken Can Baiting. Chicken can baiting. You gotta find the chickens and rattle a can on a string to bait them over by yanking it away when they try to run for it. But be careful because once they go rage mode, you're not gonna know what hit you. This is probably the most baffling minigame in the collection. Who thought of this? Why did they put the effort into making this mechanic for this one quest? I don't know, but is it fun? No? Not really? I just love that it exists. It's a hilarious side quest that I suggest you finish if you gave up on it. Though I understand if you did. I went to look up what other people thought about this one, and I had some even more laughs. I have yet to finish this quest because the third chicken is such a pain in the old could get her own chicken. Currently losing my mind over this third chicken. Been trying to get this home for the past 2 hours. I've lost my sense of self, and now all I can think about are getting chicken back home or murdering them violently with that clanger. I've been gaming for over 20 years. This chicken quest is quite possibly the most annoying, terribly designed quest I've played. Old lady can fuck herself. Like, oh my god. Any side quest that can ignite such passionate fury deserves to be checked out. I should have put this one higher. Number 18, Moogle Mischief. Round up all the Moogles into the pen by chasing them. There's one of these in every region with some useful rewards, so they're worth doing. It's kind of fun, except when they attack you back and you get pummeled with 3 things at once, dying instantly and are forced to restart the game. It's like kind of annoying, but there's so few of them, it didn't bother me. It's fun enough. Number 17, G-Bikes. They repurposed the bike driving mechanic from Remake that was present in like 2 sections of that game. And it plays pretty much the exact same, except you have to collect gold balls now. And you have a boost move. Pretty basic, inoffensive stuff. Number 16, Chocobo Glide. If you're going to have a lot of minigames in your game, one of them is going to have to be flying through rings. It's self-explanatory and kind of fun, but going for the perfect score can be a harrowing experience. The way the bird controls, where you can only gain air by diving down first, but you have to dive down for a significant amount of time, otherwise you don't go up at all, is so awkward. And the hardest points to get are at the end of the course, so it's a lot of easy repetition, failing in a split second, and then restarting the whole thing. Kind of annoying, but the game itself is not bad at all. Number 15, Mushroom Plucking. This one feels like it should be annoying, but I found it to be pretty intuitive. You gotta wiggle the control stick around and feel which sides have more give. Another great implementation of haptic triggers. I was very good at this for some reason, but apparently everyone online hates this one too. It's mostly getting points for being unique. Definitely haven't played something quite like it. It's the most Mario Party minigame of the collection here. Number 14, Dolphin Show. They did exactly what I hoped they'd do with the Junon Dolphin. You get to speed through the water with it, hitting ramps and popping balloons. It's simple, fun, and it made me think of riding the bloopers in Super Mario Sunshine, though not nearly as annoying. Number 13, Pirates Rampage, a carnival-style point shooting game. I just always find these fun. Not the most original, but it's meant to be an attraction within the world, so it fits perfectly in the chill vacation part of Costa del Sol. Luckily, they don't make you go for a perfect score here because that seems near impossible, so it doesn't come with the frustration as some of the previous ones. Number 12, Minecart Shootout. A game like this was standard fare in so many mid-2000s games, and it's even found in a few Final Fantasies. It feels like you're playing an arcade cabinet game, and I'll take any reason to get free reign with Barrett's machine gun. And the added roller coaster appeal of the minecart made it such a blast. Number 11, Galactic Saviors, a first-person spaceship shooter. Another one you've probably played before. Kinda reminds me of Kingdom Hearts' Gummy Ship. It was fun. Number 10, Cactuar Crush, an Aerith and Yuffie exclusive. They build courses around these two characters' playstyles, fighting different types of Cactuars and flipping between physical and magical damage. Aerith can make a dark or light ward around her in order to damage a Cactuar of the same type. It's a little more complex than everything we talked about so far. I definitely messed it up a lot, but I thought it was an interesting idea. The side quest it's associated with is ran by this goblin in a beanie named Kid G. He looks so out of place. I had to look him up if he was like a reference to something. Apparently he is. He's a reference to the Goblin of Goblin Island in the original game, who was the only source of a special ingredient you needed for chocobo breeding, which by the way is surprisingly not a minigame in this one. Maybe next time. Number 9, Boxes. Yeah, Boxes return from Remake and Intermission. But now they have charge-up boxes that require you to hunt other boxes before you're allowed to hit those boxes.
Oh, don't you talk about my boxes! I like boxes!
I kind of love the box hunting minigame. They've brought it back. I feel like we've done this 4 times already, but it's fun to try and plan the most efficient route and hunt every last one of them for a perfect score. I liked that in Intermission you had to adapt to Yuffie's playstyle to hit the boxes at the most efficient level. And I was hoping to try it out with some of the other characters in this, but unfortunately you're back to just Cloud again. Still fun. Number 8, the piano. You gotta give the piano credit where credit's due. They fully translated one of the most complex instruments to be played with a PlayStation controller. Look at this, you can switch chords, you can change key. They've outdone Naughty Dog's guitar mode from The Last of Us. You can freely play songs wherever you find a piano throughout the story. I'm sure there are a bunch of videos online of people playing all kinds of things. The actual minigame is a rhythm game requiring you to hit notes along with classic Final Fantasy VII tracks. Sounds good, I love rhythm games. Here's my one thing. Hitting the notes is done with the control sticks. You must flick each one of them in one of their 8 directions. This feels awkward. A button makes sense for a single input, that's why rhythm games use them. A control stick is not a single input interface. You have to tilt it all the way through to the end before it counts as a hit. So the player needs to account for the less than a second delay between start and end of the input, while also making sure they're pointing it in the right direction. Not too much lower or too much higher, or it'll think you're hitting a different note. I managed to get a perfect score on like 2 songs, but didn't even attempt to do more than that. So yeah, the piano is up here for how elaborate and impressive it is, but in my opinion, it doesn't really feel great to play. Number 7, 3D Brawler. This is worth playing just for the HD low poly look of all the brawlers, but it's a pretty fun reaction game too. All you really have to do is know which way to dodge depending on what the next punch is going to be, where is it coming from. You don't do much fighting yourself, just wait for the enemy to get tired and you get a free hit. Survive long enough and you win. But it might be the most difficult minigame in the whole collection. Yes, believe it or not, harder than the chicken one. The later opponents go into rapid fire and they give you no time to react. They fake you out too. And the wind-up animations are designed to be similar to each other so you get them mixed up. I do not understand how a human could beat the final boss of this. I cheated, and it took me a while. By pausing the game every time he winds up, I give my brain enough time to process that he's doing an uppercut or something so I can dodge correctly. And I still messed it up a bunch of times. It's crazy. Number 6, Rocket League, but with dogs. Not as elaborate as most of the games in the top 10, but it was one that I had pretty much no problems with. Just roll a ball in the goal faster than your opponents. It gets a little more difficult, but nothing frustrating. It was just fun, I don't know. I wish there were more stages. Number 5, Chocobo Racing. They skipped breeding, but they couldn't go all in on the gold saucer without racing. This might be considered a medium game. There are so many courses. There's Grand Prix Cups, and there's customizable attire to enhance your bird that you can only learn from collecting feathers in each region of the main game. They boost your acceleration, speed, weight, intelligence. It looks just like Mario Kart, and it plays similarly too. Chocobos can drift, as we know, and this ignites flames behind them that give you mini boosts. You can collect these balloons, but sadly they don't give you items, just more boosts. Blue increases your top speed, yellow grants a manually activated boost, and red increases the high speed gauge that is also manually activated. I would have liked items, to be honest, or some kind of way to burden your opponents. Racing without player interaction is kind of dull. You might as well just be racing the clock. Some of these tracks are interesting, but most of them are not super memorable. Really, you're just getting watered down Mario Kart, and there's no other way to slice it. It's more elaborate than anything we've talked about so far, but it's just kind of mid to play, I guess. I never actually raced in the original 7, so I'm not sure how it compares. I think you used to like cheer your Chocobo on, kind of like the Chow Garden races in Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. I don't know, but maybe it's cool that you can manually race now, but it wasn't super interesting to me. It's still number 5, I guess. It was fun enough for a while. Number 4, Frog Guys. Yeah. Get turned into a frog and be the last one standing. The courses are lifted exactly as they are from Fall Guys, like the original couple of Fall Guys maps. Final Fantasy has collabed with Fall Guys officially, so they know what they're doing here. Why is it so high on the list? Just look at it. It's so stupid, but not stupid in the bad way like the chicken game. Stupid in the Final Fantasy VII way. I wish there were more stages or more straightforward platforming levels because this is the fun I look for in a minigame. You can get turned into a toad form in battle, but that's usually so chaotic that I don't even get a good look at the model. I never notice that each character has their own specialized toad that looks like them and even carries their weapons sometimes. And they all follow you around during this game. What a great detail. So yeah, Fall Guys is a 10 out of 10. Number 3, Fort Condor. I had a feeling a game this elaborate would have to last beyond its original place in the DLC for 7 Remake. Yes, the tactical 1v1 tower defense makes a return, but it's not the Triple Triad-esque side game where you collect pieces to build your team out and challenge NPCs around town. It's only in one region at specific points, and you use pre-built teams. It's simplified, but that overall makes it easier to figure out. The actual matches introduce small new mechanics and even quality of life improvements over what we played in Intermission. I can't believe we got a whole sequel to Fort Condor. If this type of game overwhelmed you last time or you weren't into it, I'd consider trying it this time around. It might be more beginner friendly. Also, there's a small story you follow throughout its questline featuring the party getting isekai'd into the world with matching PS1 polygon models to boot, and you gotta love that. Number 2, Gears and Gambits. Putting a sequel to a semi-complex tactics game within a game wasn't enough, so they made a brand new one too. It's also relegated to just one region, but it's another whole tactics game they built for a single side quest line. It looks similar to Fort Condor. You're spawning little units with specific attributes and fighting against one center boss monster who also spawns things to fight you. It's a tug of war as the enemy needs to defeat just one of your 3 spawn points to win, or you defeat the guy at the center to win. But unlike Fort Condor, it's not just about who you spawn and when you spawn them, it's about what you program the units to do. Read that title again. Ivalice fans know what we're talking about. Your 3 unit types are individually programmable using literally the Gambit system that was the core mechanic of Final Fantasy XII. Quick explanation for those who didn't play that one, you can set basically a series of if statements using the nodes and options given to you, something like if unit is weak to fire, use fire attack, or if ally drops below 50%, use cure. It's a really unique and interesting way to fight in an RPG. Play Final Fantasy XII, it's cool. But I can't get over how they took that whole system and put it into a minigame in this bigger game just for one side quest. Obviously, you won't have as many options as you did in 12, but it's just enough complexity to make Gears and Gambits pack a punch. I had a lot of fun tweaking my units in slightly different ways in hopes of gaining the advantage in the more challenging levels. I like it more than Fort Condor because it gave me much more freedom and felt like a deeper puzzle to solve. I said to still give Fort Condor a shot if you're not privy to tactical stuff, but I don't think I could say the same for this one. Any 12 fan will pick this up and immediately get it, but I can't imagine what it's like to try and learn what the Gambit system is through all the tutorials it throws at you just for this one small piece of the game. It would probably be like how Blitzball was for me in Final Fantasy X. Giving it a shot, but eventually just giving up because I was not having any fun. But Gears and Gambits was pretty much my favorite minigame in Rebirth because I'll admit my number 1 choice is a bit of a cheat. And I hate to do this, but I'm gonna have to initiate ATS. I didn't think it'd take this long to get here, but if you forgot what that means, it means we've entered the spoiler section of the chapter. Skip to the next one, just a few minutes away to get back on track because I really think the number 1 minigame needs to be experienced on your own terms. You've been warned. Number 1.
Behold, a mechanical metropolis built of blood, sweat, and gears. The city of Garia.
Loveless. Technically, this includes the Junon Parade segment as well, since they're both QuickTime event minigames, just like the Honeybee Inn dance number in Remake. The parade was fantastic, but Loveless is what I'm talking about here. I consider it a cheat because it's really a glorified cutscene, but it is playable. You can mess it up and affect how things go, so it counts. Contrary to how I normally approach my reviews, I am not putting gameplay above everything else right now. The gameplay is not better than Gears and Gambits or Fort Condor, but I have to face facts. I don't know if I've ever been charmed by a game as much as I was experiencing Loveless. I already found Remake and Rebirth to be incredibly charming, but this part of Rebirth is the peak of it. We'll go into more reasons why later, but the play itself is the peak of the peak. You go to see the play during your magical gold saucer date near the end of the game. Each character gets put into a role. Cloud is the knight in shining armor, Kate Sith is the jesting narrator, Barrett is the hammy villain with Red as his sidekick, and Aerith is the princess in white. Tifa and Yuffie are watching in the crowd because Aerith is best girl and she's canon in that role. Anyway, the direction, the animation, the over-the-top acting that the voice actors give, I can't think of a better word to describe it than charming. If I was ranking the minigames on this list by sheer amount of joy that I got out of them, then this belongs on the top. I'm not exaggerating when I say I had a big, stupid grin on my face during the entirety of the sequence. These are the moments that make this trilogy special. And you can tell the developers know that and tried to make it as special as they could. Watching this show play out on the big TV on a comfy night bundled up, thinking about this journey I'm on, how long it's taken to get here, and how these guys have been there the whole time with me. Feeling the nostalgia of 7 Remake, basking in the moment that is 7 Rebirth, and the excitement that there's still a whole nother entire game ahead. It all hit me at once there. It's also the first time we've actually seen any part from Loveless after hearing about it for so long. I wonder if anything Genesis rambled about in Crisis Core is even referenced here. I can't remember a dang thing that guy said, so who knows. Welcome back. We covered the minigames and all the aspects of world exploration, but how about the proper side quests themselves? Divisive in Remake, as some considered them too fillery, which hurt the pacing of the game, specifically in certain sections that forced you to do a few of them before moving on with the main story. Rebirth never requires you to do them, but there's a whole bunch more, of course, given how many more towns you visit. As someone who didn't mind them in Remake, I found a good amount of them to be better here than they were in that game. Some are average, fun enough yet forgettable, but they do something really smart with the majority of side quests in the game. They tie quests directly to your bond level with each party member. For example, an Aerith-focused quest could be something about her, but it might just be an NPC's conflict that she's specifically interested in, like picking flowers for the kids at the Chocobo Ranch. This is a genius way to make a quest more interesting and attractive for players. At the end of the day, it's hard for me to get invested in some random generic guy I know will go away forever once I fetch something for him, but this is one of a million things to do in this game. The developers don't have time to make every quest hit so hard. A potential solution is to cut down the amount of quests to juice up the ones that you have left, or involve the same characters in their own quest lines so you can actually get invested in them. That's something Final Fantasy XVI did right because of its hub area you kept returning to check on your crew. It's one of my favorite aspects of that game. But Rebirth is more of a traditional traveling party RPG. It tries to do a similar thing by involving each of your friends, but it kind of lacks the personal attachment some of the time. Like, hey Red, why do you care so much about baiting these chickens back to this old lady? Because I'm an animal and chickens are also animals. Oh, okay, then let's do it, buddy, say no more. That doesn't mean there aren't any hidden great moments between you and them. One that stuck out to me is the quest where you have to chase a dog through the woods while fighting off monsters. Besides the funny song that plays the whole time composed for this one single side quest that doesn't ever appear again, it also sparks a pretty intimate conversation between Barrett and Cloud about parenting.
Know how some parents stop their kids from leaving the nest? Loads of parents are like that, but I told myself I'd be different. I'd never keep my little girl from flying. I hear you scoffing. You think I can't do it, and that's what scares me. As much as I want to let her fly, I don't know if I'll be able to let go when the time comes. Maybe I'll panic, get in her way, hold her down, all to keep her safe. Oh, Marlene. I wish you could be my baby girl forever.
Barrett, get your shit together. Marlene's barely out of diapers. You've got time.
Right. I'm just getting worked up over nothing. Yeah, she won't be leaving me for a while.
Then again...
Hey!
In Nibelheim, you have to chase a cat down in a similar way. You find out that that cat is Fluffy, Tifa's childhood cat who ran away. We read all about him in Traces of Two Pasts. I'm telling you, that book is a great prelude to this game. I guess what I'm trying to say is the side quests vary in worthiness, but you just never know when it's going to hit you with something cool. For me, it was well worth doing absolutely everything to make sure I didn't miss out. Every little intel dot on Chadley's intel bar was filled. The funny part about side quests focusing on one party member is everyone else is still also there. They don't tend to give input to any conversation. They just stand there out of focus in the background until it's their turn to hang out with the main guy. There are photo mode quests, and that might be the only part of this game that feels completely unfinished. I never care about photo modes in games, but I thought maybe I could use this one to make a thumbnail for the video or something. Unfortunately, this is like the worst photo mode I've ever seen. You can't do anything interesting with it. Basically, you got some filters and you can slightly zoom in and out. That is it. There's one scenic photo quest per region. All you have to do is go to the spot and open photo mode. Just open it. Basically pause the game, unpause, and you beat the quest. It's weird because there are some normal quests in the game where you get a handheld camera to use and you gotta take accurate pictures or find hidden objects with them. So there was a system there, but the actual photo mode is the most tacked on thing for some reason. Anyway, I've been saving the absolute best side quests in the game for last, the Proto-Relic quests. Each region has a Proto-Relic quest line. These are the ones that have the most work put into them. A lot of them feature the most elaborate minigames that ranked in the top spots of my list from earlier, and all the party members get involved in some way. Collect all the proto-relics over the course of the entire game to unlock a final quest line. Ooh, that's cool. I love when games do that. There's so much to discuss about the proto-relic quests alone. I would highly suggest checking them out, even if you generally don't care about side content. As long as you can handle the minigames, that is. I'm going ATS mode for the rest of this section. You've been warned. So, the proto-relics are a brand new idea, not evolved from the original game at all. And for me personally, they hit the biggest surprise in the whole game. The entire Proto-Relic quest line is centered around one character. And I could not tell you how happy I was to see him one last time on this REFFOID journey.
Eyes of fire with purpose. Oh, yet a stripling. One whose mettle must be tested.
Gilgamesh has grown to be one of my favorite characters over the years, but this is somehow the first time he's got to be in a huge modern budget AAA game. I guess he was in 15, but like that was a totally different form. I'm talking about the Gilgamesh we know and love. And he's in such a big role. There's so much fan service in this game, it's now gone beyond 7. As I was playing this, I kept thinking, like, when is it gonna stop throwing cool new stuff at me? When will it stop? It's not stopping yet, though. Each region has its own sub-story that Gilgamesh is often adjacent to. He's hunting these relics down to try and get them before us. The first region involves that gang of weirdos who gave you trouble in the last game. Wasn't expecting a callback to that either. Oh, and that reminds me, Kyrie returns as well, finding any excuse to leave Midgard just to show up again in various side quests. Leslie makes an appearance too, just to let you know they're still around. You know, after I read the book they originated in, Final Fantasy VII The Kids Are Alright, a Turk side story, I thought we would get more hints and references to it since that story takes place later in the timeline, or maybe we'd run into more characters from it, but that's not really the case. Kyrie is just trying to run a merc-for-hire business, which is in character, but I was kind of disappointed that they weren't a little more fleshed out. Back to the Proto-Relic questline though, I gotta highlight the Cosmo Canyon quests for being maybe the best slice of it. Besides introducing Gears and Gambits, it also runs you into the other Avalanche crew from episode Intermission. This prompts Barrett and Tifa to look back on memories of the trio we lost in Remake, Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse. It's a sort of epilogue to their story, since those two didn't get much of a chance to mourn before. By this point, I was still holding on to my theory that at least Wedge might not be dead. The last we saw of him, he was rushed out of the Shinra building by Whispers. That doesn't mean he's dead. they whisked him away because he was interfering with the timeline, right? You know the rule by now. If there's no body, then I assume they're gonna make a grand return. Even if there is a body half the time, they got a good chance. But when Tifa goes off about the time she spent with Wedge, it flashes back to his final scene from Remake, and I was like, here we go, here comes the big reveal that Wedge is alright. Oh. They extended the scene to show Wedge violently splatter on the ground. That man is dead. Why did my boy Wedge get done so dirty? Oh wait, I just remembered. This is how he died in the original 7, right? He fell off the tower that was going to the plate at the same time Biggs and Jesse died. Oh my god, the Fate Ghosts weren't just getting him away from the main characters, they were like, hey, you should have died a while ago in this timeline, so they straight up killed him. They actually just killed him. I'm 4 years late to this revelation, I guess. They probably put this flashback in Rebirth just to shut people like me up. But these quests have it all. Variety, minigames, Gilgamesh, lore from previous games, like it's all the good stuff. And once you collect all the proto-relics, you get to fight Gilgamesh on Gilgamesh Island. Well, actually, he puts you through another series of trials, fighting summon bosses at the same time. That's 2 summons at once. Holy crap, Odin and Alexander at the same time it was crazy. And once you've done that, you get a true bare-knuckle brawl against the man himself. A full boss fight for Gilgamesh, and beating him gives you his summon materia. And let me just say, can't believe it's come to this, but my god, we need to put another battle at the big bridge in Theater Rhythm. This might be the best one.
Come to think of it, we have our own score to settle, don't we? Though these worlds be infinite, there is room in them for but one bladesman. And to prove it, I shall divest you of your weapon. Here and now, I will have that Buster Sword. Then I shall prize it from your cold, dead hand. I'll let your blessings shatter your bones.
Anyway, it's a good questline. I loved all the extra stuff to do, the character moments it provided, and the huge amount of variety. This is my ideal open world game. The only thing I would add is like a new triple triad-esque sub-game to play across the whole world because that was such an amazing concept, but I suppose that would be asking too much. This is Queen's Blood, an area-controlled deck-building card game clearly inspired by Triple Triad. I have been dreaming of this in a modern game since Final Fantasy IX dropped the ball in its own direct follow-up. The concept of a game within a game that you can play with its own campaign that overlaps with the main story is so genius and so fun. I don't get why every RPG doesn't do this. Final Fantasy VIII had a dedicated button just for asking NPCs to play a round of Triple Triad. Almost anyone in the whole world was willing to play, which was hilarious from a world-building perspective, but also meant the difficulty would jump all over the place. To gain new cards, you'd have to try and use an ability that transformed monsters into them, or for actually good cards, you'd have to win matches. But you can only steal the cards that you want if you flipped them during the game. If you lost, the enemy would steal from you. While fun, it was pretty aggressive, and there was no through line to the whole experience tying anything together. Just challenging random people to matches. I think there was some master you could fight somewhere after enough wins, but I don't think I came close to that. Queen's Blood is very much the modern AAA streamlined version of what Triple Triad was. We got a taste of how it might work in episode Intermission with its version of Fort Condor. Each region has specified NPCs ready to battle and marked on your map. If you lose to them, nothing happens, except for the one kid who makes you bet money on it. If you win, Every NPC has a unique card rewarded to you, and you don't have to pull any strings. You can also just buy a booster pack from a shop to get some fresh ones. They've made the side card game more accessible than ever, and the game itself is definitely the most fun I've had with one of these games. Although, Joustus from Shovel Knight King of Cards might still be my favorite. But this is a much bigger game. Triple Triad was played on a 3x3 grid, Tetramaster on 4x4, both letting you place cards anywhere. Queen's Blood is a 3x5 board, but the card placement is not free. You start on the left end with your opponent on the opposite side. Each card has a placement level, 1 to 3. These little chess pawns show you the required placement level for that space. The cards show a pattern of spaces around it which will level up upon being placed, so if these spaces overlap with spaces that are level 1, they'll upgrade to level 2, allowing you to use one of your stronger cards. All the while your enemy is doing the same thing on their turn, but the tricky part is that if a card's space effect overlaps with an opponent's pawns, they change color to match the user. So you can level a space to 3 only to have the enemy take it right from under you. Each card also has a point value, and some of them enhance other cards by fulfilling certain conditions. If you have the most points in a row, you gain those points at the end of the match, so if you get like 15 but the enemy finds a way to get 16 at the last second, they get all 16 points and you get nothing for the row. That's all the basics. I'm sure you can already see how building your deck a certain way can turn the tide of battle. As you rank up and journey across Gaia, you'll face stronger opponents with all sorts of new mechanics. You can try an enhance build with cards that get enhanced whenever you enhance another card so it keeps stacking. Or you could be crazy and do the opposite. Create a build where your cards get stronger when killing your own other cards. It sounds like it wouldn't work, but you can make it work. You gotta have a balance of utility cards, good for covering ground, high-level cards that can only be played in the late game, but will get you points, and backup cards for when things go wrong. I'm a fan of replacement cards. They destroy a card that you have and take its place. Useless in the beginning, but if you draw one when the board is practically full, it'll save your butt. A lot of them can transfer the power of a card they replace onto another card, perfect for bailing you out of a row you know you lost in hope of buffing another row enough to snag the win. You'll start to learn your deck inside and out. You'll make decisions to place cards in a certain way, knowing that another might be drawn soon, and this layout will synergize much better with it, as long as the enemy doesn't step on your plans. Or maybe you can find a way to win even when they quash plan A, or you can step all over what they were trying to do. With so many cards to experiment with, you can make a deck that works for you. And whether you win by the skin of your teeth or wipe the floor with your opponent, Queen's Blood is a deeply satisfying game. Gosh, I loved it. The first thought I often had when entering a new town was, is there going to be a Queen's Blood guy here? And there always was. During the main story, the boat ride from Junon, they turn it into this fun cruise vacation event centered around a Queen's Blood tournament. You fight everyone on the boat, including your friends. A chunk of the main story of this game is just about the main cast relaxing on a boat and playing cards together. Was this game made for me? It brings back what I said about Remake. The game allows itself to breathe. And I understand how that might bore some folks, but that makes it feel so unlike the other games coming out around it. I literally just want to hang out with these guys all day, and that's exactly what Rebirth gives me. But the people who see it as filler, the people who hate minigames, this is probably their least favorite chapter, but I couldn't get enough. Besides the main questline of ranking up and conquering every Queen's Blood player in the land, there's separate Queen's Blood minigames. Are you kidding me? There are challenge levels that put you in the middle of a match with cards already on the table and a pre-built deck. There's usually just one solution to get yourself out of the pickle you're in, so it's more like a puzzle that you have to solve. There's also tournaments where you fight the same opponent but keep your score accumulated across each round. And you come in with just one hand and you need to be careful to not enter the last round with like only 2 cards left. You might be able to earn extra cards by unlocking treasure chests in one of the other rounds. It's the most challenging Queen's Blood stuff. It puts your knowledge of the mechanics to the test. I'd buy a whole game like this for real. There's also an original story to go along with the Queen's Blood questline. When you rank up, Cloud receives visions from a tormented soul, the creator of the game who became so obsessed with winning and searching for the legendary Blood Queen card that he went insane. It doesn't really develop too far beyond that, it's just a small thing to tie the sub-adventure together. I don't need to spoil it, but the ending of the story was a bit of a letdown. That doesn't change my opinion that Queen's Blood is probably the best sub-game in series history. Rebirth gives you so much, it's creating a problem for the next game. I wondered if Fort Condor would be carried over to this at all, and it blew my expectations away by not only including it, but also being overshadowed by a much grander and more fun sub-game. So for part 3, I gotta ask, are we getting more Queen's Blood? Will they expand on this format, or will they replace it with something else? Or will they include it and something else? If they really want to outdo themselves with each part, just how big is part 3 gonna be? We'll see in 2028 or later. That's enough fun and games. What are you doing, Cloud? Don't you know there's a much more pressing matter at hand? Like dating. Final Fantasy VII Remake did technically feature a character bond system, though I wouldn't fault you for not realizing it. The system was basically an invisible affinity meter for Tifa and Aerith that would go up or down depending on your answers to the only 3 specific questions asked by them in the first half of the game, and how many side quests you did in their respective area. This would affect how nice their dresses were in Chapter 9, and which one of them has a private moment with you in one cutscene in Chapter 14. If neither of them had enough points there, they just give you Barret. It was something, but not all that special. Time for Rebirth to do what it does best and crank things way up. I already mentioned earlier how most of the side quests place a focus on one of the party members. This is tied to Rebirth's much more intricate, rewarding, and visible bond system, which is not just reliant on side quests, but many more questions to answer throughout the main story. You can even grow closer to your favorite friend just by battling side by side. By unlocking more synergy moves and using them in battle for the first time, it will grow Cloud's bond with them, mixing the often completely separate social and battle elements, which is a very cool touch. Another thing to think about while fighting instead of just mindlessly slicing away as we usually do. It also means you can be more sure about who you're gonna end up with. I'm ride or die team Aerith, so I was careful to unlock all her synergy moves with Cloud and took my sweet time with Tifa and everyone else. Because it's not just that endless war between those two, Barret is a consolation prize no longer. If you want him to be the closest with Cloud, you can make that happen. Same with Red and Yuffie. 5 characters all have their hats in the ring competing for your attention. Who will you choose? Probably not Red, but it's an option. Cait Sith, however, is not. You can view how close you are with your party through this smiley face above them, and he just has an expressionless cat face. There is no Cait Sith bond and no unique quests with him. Someone out there is going to be disappointed in that. But he does join the party in the second half of the game, plus there's story complications about it, so I get it, maybe next time, Cait. Completionists out there might be sweating again, thinking about the 100% requirement of replaying chapters over and over just to see all 3 possible dresses for the girls in 7 Remake. I'm happy to report that you won't need to go through a hassle like that again, at least not quite like that. Once a character bond passes the final threshold, the dark blue happy face, that's all you need to worry about, and it's really not difficult to do if you like side quests. Your bond can grow more, but that's the threshold for unlocking any optional cutscene stuff. And there's no reward for seeing the result of like a halfway bond or anything like that. It doesn't make you repeat a million things to see every possibility. You just need to get the final smiley face. The game still tracks who has the highest bond out of all of them to pick for your playthrough, but when you finish the game, you'll get the option to choose anyone from the bunch and see the private moments you didn't get to see initially. Really convenient and much appreciated. I started my journey with the goal of getting 100% bond with Aerith. No cheating, no guides, no resetting. I messed it up on the first quest. You gotta pick the right colored flowers according to the headpiece in the picture they provided. I didn't realize there were actually different options. I thought you just had to kill the enemies there and take them. So I picked the red, the yellow, and the blue flowers. Yeah, those look kinda blue, I guess. No, they're white. The white flowers were over there. I fumbled her over basic color coordination, but for the most immersive experience, I chose to live with my mistakes. If a girl wanted me to pick the correct flowers for a headpiece in real life, this is likely how it would go. And for the rest of the game, I did nearly everything perfect, except 2 little dialogue choices where I went for a sarcastic joke thinking she would get it, and she just looked at me funny. Again, very accurate to my real life experience. So in the end, each of those questions and the imperfect quest completion accounted for 1% off of my total score, ending me with a 97% bond with Aerith. It might have been a little more, since I'll admit I gave myself a mulligan when I chose Cloud's bathing suit and the game said, "Great, you're matching with Tifa," and I was like, no, I did not mean to do that. In second place is Barrett with a 90%, then Tifa with 87%, followed by Red and Yuffie tied with 82%. All of them passing the threshold for seeing the romantic cutscene at the Gold Saucer. I only intentionally tried to fumble Tifa every now and then, only in fear that her bond level would surpass Aerith due to my earlier mistakes. For every other character, I just answered the prompts with my honest thoughts.
I'm seeing stars. Cloud, you're so gonna pay for this.
Give the man a break. I think it was a memorable experience.
So what is all this trouble actually for? Fans of the original Final Fantasy VII knew before they even started. It was for one of the most famous and talked about parts of the game, the legendary Gold Saucer date. Through a bond system closer to the one in Remake, the original 7's bonds culminate in a moment where you and your highest bonded character go to the theme park together and have a romantic night on the Ferris wheel. That was all it was, one little harmless scene, but the freedom of choice resonated so much with players, it was a big deal for a fantasy RPG in 1997. The nostalgia people have for this moment has raised expectations for its remaking tremendously high, and the developers knew it would be, so they put their all into it. It's not a moment anymore, it's a whole experience. 2 experiences actually. You go on a cute little date during your first Gold Saucer visit, then a bigger, more romantic one on your second visit. There are 6 different possibilities for both of these nights. Each character provides their own quirks, dialogue, and music even. Their own main theme will be remixed into a fun theme park night out tune that you can only hear if you bonded with them. The rest of the details about the night is spoilery, so I'll activate ATS here. The date is one of the absolute highlights of the game. It's magical. I wouldn't want to rob anyone of experiencing it for themselves, so skip to the next chapter if you please. The Gold Saucer is just incredible. I love the haunted hotel you stay at with the zombie bellhop hanging from the ceiling and your room full of booby traps and jump scares. When you hear a knock on the door, that's when the date begins. Playing all the games and hanging out there is great, but the night peaks when you head to the stage and watch the play that's running. Loveless. I assume if you're watching this spoiler section, you've also watched the minigame spoiler section where I mentioned this. All the characters participate in a role as you watch the play and react to the QTEs to get the best ending. If you're on a date with one of the 3 girls, they will be placed in the role of Rosa, though in my opinion, if anyone is canon in that role, it's Aerith. Sadly, you won't get to see Barrett since he's stuck in that villain role, but you can still choose to confess your love to him instead of the princess to see him get all flustered and confused. Loveless was one of the best overindulgent additions to this overindulgent story. But that's not even the climax of this little episode. You still get a new Ferris wheel date with whoever you choose. You get to watch the fireworks at the highest point for maximum romance. Aerith's date is a little weird because she keeps mentioning Zack, who she fell in love with first, and that she's trying to connect to Cloud, but he's kind of emotionally vacant. It ends with them holding hands, which was nice until I learned that Tifa straight up kisses you. What the heck? That's not fair. I had to play through the start of chapter 12 like 5 times just to see all the possibilities. They never fully commit Cloud to any one girl so that the choice and interpretation could be left up to the player, but this is a pretty distinct line between them. I don't know. Rebirth generally has an Aerith bias given the circumstances of the ending, but this is the one time it flips to Tifa. I blame Zack. The Yuffie date is less romantic and much more playful. She mentions Tifa totally has a crush on you. That's another point for her. She brings up Zack too, who she also had feelings for as she reminisces on their short time together in Crisis Core. Yuffie awkwardly gives Cloud a kiss on the cheek and pretends to beat him up, and surprisingly Cloud plays along, which is kinda super cute. The Red 13 date is interesting, it actually hides some important lore. He confesses to Cloud that he and Aerith could see the future during the events of FF7 Remake. That's something we were able to figure out, but it was never outright told to us, and Cloud certainly didn't know. And because we killed the Arbiter of Fate, that future sight ability was taken away from both of them. In a scene that comes later, Marlene says that Aerith will die. They finally just acknowledge it directly. It flashes back to the time Aerith gave her a vision when she touched her head, thus confirming that the ability can be passed along through touch. So the question is, did Marlene lose the ability too? We don't know, because we kinda don't see her for the entirety of this game. Also, you can pet the dog. Barrett's date is great. He talks about his first date with Myrna and tries to give Cloud advice on the girls, which of course it hardly gets through to him. You better confess your feelings to whoever you like before it's too late, he says, wink wink. You got future vision too, Barrett? So there's a lot of nice details in all of these, and it was well worth going back to see them all. But I gotta mention the last one. Barrett's no longer the consolation prize, right? So who is?
Oops, did we wake you?
Something on fire?
Nope, just happened to stumble across some tickets to Loveless.
Ain't nothing weird about watching a play with the guys. Come on, we'll make a night of it.
If you don't have a strong enough bond with anyone, you get this weird, awkward night out with the boys. You know when your friend invites you somewhere and he's gotta be the only one you know, but he ends up having to go away for one reason or another and you're just stuck with these other friends by association? That's the vibe here. These are guys you pretty much just met, and it's questionable why they're even tagging along at this point in the story. At least the game seems to be a little self-aware of that. When I first discovered this scene, after my perfect night with Aerith, I thought it was hilarious, but I would be pretty upset if on my actual playthrough, my game was so bad that none of the girls, or even my best buddy, wanted to hang out with me, so I got stuck with the grumpy old man, the conniving cat no one likes, and the edgelord. What a squad. These guys should have their own spin-off. Alright, should we talk about story or what? Story is most people's main interest in RPGs, and often their opinion on the game will be mostly influenced by the quality of the story. And I can't quite say the same. To be honest, Rebirth has offered me so much fun, variety, minigames, music, so much world to explore, so many memorable character interactions. I don't think a single REFFOID episode has gotten this deep before getting to plot discussion. I care about story, contrary to what others may think. It's very important. I just think gameplay and other things you do in the game are more important. As I sit here and collect my thoughts on the last game in the REFFOID journey, I realize it has already won me over tenfold. After what Remake did in regards to the original story, I had my expectations for Rebirth, and we're gonna get into it, but there's so much good here that it already outweighs my thoughts on the story, like it doesn't even matter. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth continues to extend memorable parts of the original and suffers from the same criticism as the last game for that same reason. Some may say the story feels bloated. Others, like myself, may enjoy basking in it all. I basked in the dystopia of Midgar all throughout the last game, but I understood the claustrophobia it may have induced in some people. Rebirth takes its time as well, but it no longer has that problem. It's open, it's breathable, and it covers so much more ground. It's a fantasy road trip where the characters get into almost episodic adventures while bumping into conflict after conflict on their pretty simple quest: find Sephiroth and the Black Materia. The story opens with Cloud telling the party about the moment Sephiroth went mad, as he remembers it. This would be known as the Nibelheim incident, but the whole event is extended and playable now. It's a perfect start to an epic journey, and fans will love getting to play as Sephiroth for this part, as the two of them climb Mount Nibel to the reactor. It also makes for a great tutorial for the game's combat and new synergy mechanics. Plus, it's just funny to make Cloud do things and then have to narrate it to his friends.
No? I figured you might be there.
You went into my room?
I did.
You went through my stuff? If that's your idea of a joke, I'm not laughing. You could have just left it alone, you know. You went through my stuff?
I know I shouldn't have.
Cloud! You asshole!
And right off the bat, even in this flashback, we start getting some meta stuff. We just talked about in the last section how certain characters can touch other people and transfer this time viewing ability to them. We see Claudia tap Cloud on the shoulder and that triggers a flashback. Then Cloud grabs Sephiroth and that triggers a flashback. Claudia tells him, "You have to live," which is a thing that Sephiroth says. So they continue playing with meta stuff right away. I start to realize I am now cursed with the burden of knowing. I kinda get what fans were going through when Remake first dropped. Instead of being fully immersed in the story, I started being more concerned with what was in the old game and what was part of the new meta. But I'll save that stuff for the spoilers section. Unfortunately, there's not that much I can discuss outside of the spoiler section that hasn't already been said in the chapters on exploration and character bonds. I liked bonding with the characters almost more than doing the main story with them. The majority of the main story quest is just doing random stuff from town to town. I can already hear the haters complain about filler, but I don't know. This is a sequel. If after playing Remake you thought the huge sequel would be faster paced and more focused, that's on you. Rebirth isn't doing anything story-wise to be redeemed by those who thought it was bloated before. But something that surprised me was that it didn't actually do too many crazy left field things to change the story we know. All the moments you remember are hit here, and they're either the same but extended, or mostly the same with a little twist. Those pesky whispers everybody complained about are more or less absent from the vast majority of this game. And as for the stuff that's just extended, I loved it all. The towns really stuck out to me. They make sure you spend a good chunk of time in and around each of them. And you already know some of the most iconic moments are within those towns. Starting in the wet, cavernous undercity of Junon and climbing up top to the Imperial Strip with the museum and the fancy restaurants was so unique. Each town, even if it's an oppressed, military-occupied space, feels like a vacation getaway. Remember how fun and alive Wall Market was in Remake? Running through that town and its main story was probably the best part of that whole game for me. Well, in Rebirth, there's like 5 of those sequences. Really, the whole game feels like a vacation. The sun is always blazing, you're taking beautiful nature walks and visiting huge landmarks in every chapter, and then one of the chapters is literally a vacation within the overall vacation. You go on a cruise where you play games with your friends, and it brings you to a beach paradise after that, where you continue goofing off and playing games with your friends, but now you're all in bathing suits.
Hey, what's up?
They're getting some sun too, huh?
Yeah.
And this is all right before you go to an amusement park where you play games and go on dates with your friends. Like, what are we doing, guys? Well, the answer is, we're having fun. It's been years since I've had this much pure fun with a AAA title like this. I love a multi-$100 million game that puts fun factor before everything else. Sadly, fun is a non-specific and very subjective word. Rebirth is surprisingly plot light, if you consider the amount of time spent on the plot versus everything else you want to do. And those looking for an epic RPG story with tons of twists and turns might not dig this one super much. This sure is part 2 of 3. There aren't many new building blocks or new questions that need answering, but there also isn't a definitive conclusion, nor are many questions answered. That middle part of a story where the characters are simply adventuring is basically what this is. Looking at it on its own, Rebirth's story feels a little unfocused, unstructured. And maybe they don't want you thinking of Rebirth as a story on its own, but how could we not? Maybe when the full trilogy is finished and you can run it through all the way, start to finish, maybe it'll feel different. But I really do think that Remake had a satisfying beginning, middle, and end. Midgar was a perfect set piece for an isolated story about the poor slum dwellers rising up against their oppressors, climbing their fancy tower, and escaping their clutches. Sure, there's a bunch of cliffhangers and setups for the next game, but it was still a complete story. Rebirth is a story about those rebels enjoying their freedom and traveling the world. It's a ton of fun, but there isn't exactly a gripping hero's journey. Certainly not the kind of epic you'd expect from the legendary Final Fantasy VII. So that's where fans got frustrated this time around, especially those purists. But they kind of made their bet already. I'm not a purist. This may not be the heaviest story in the series, but its dedication to having a good time and sending the player on a 100-hour getaway to a dream world reminded me why I love video games so much. And I don't want to make it sound like the story has no sauce, because it really shines in the smaller moments. Just like Remake, since it's not too concerned with moving the plot along, it can dwell on personal moments between the characters. There are so few games that get the opportunity to do this. Gosh, I love this party so much. Well, mostly the ones returning from the last game. Cait Sith is mostly a goofball sidekick sort of character. I suppose he'll shine more in part 3, but I don't love him now. I just like him. An upgrade from the original game where I absolutely despised him. The funny accent is doing a lot of the heavy lifting there. Red 13 is cool for some of the time. I'll get back to him later. Yuffie has finally got to spend quality time with the rest of the crew, and I found her to be great. She adds an innocent, childlike wonder to the dynamic. One of my favorite relationships developed this time was between her and Barrett. It's a subtle thing, but they're often seen reacting to stuff together behind Cloud. In the early game, she bothers him and he waves her off. But by the end, he's throwing playful punches at her and she's dodging them and they're laughing, and it's like the most adorable thing. Barrett gets a little protective of her and kind of goes like dad mode. Dude, Barrett's just one of my favorite characters ever. Can I just say that? He gets a deserved spotlight for a while this time when you travel through his hometown. Not gonna go into details, but it's handled very faithfully to the original. There's no fate ghosts involved, and it's one of the emotional high points of the whole game. And let's not forget the last 2 honorary party members. It's finally time for a long-awaited Cid update. Perhaps the most famous Cid of all the Cids finally makes his remake debut, though I wish there was more to say about him. He comes into the story when the crew needs a plane to fly to the next area, and he's like, "You need a pilot? Well, shoot, I'll do it for you." And so he does. Towards the near end of the game, he decides to accompany you, but it's not very well explained why. You get no backstory on him, and he barely says much aside from the expected wisecrack. If I didn't know any better, I'd probably be very surprised to see him playable in the next game. Also, his voice is good. I don't know if I'm just too used to it, but I miss his Kingdom Hearts voice.
What in the... Huh? What in the world is this?
And now for Vincent, the strange vampire guy with a gun you dig out of a coffin, who also decides to join you for some reason. He was an optional character like Yuffie in the original game, so giving him a reasonable explanation within the story for following you to the ends of the earth is not something they're interested in bothering with. At least thanks to the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, we know how deep Vincent's relationship goes with Shinra. And they can definitely retroactively incorporate that into the next game. They already started in Intermission. Dirge of Cerberus is in an awkward position because on one hand, it's the perfect game to get remastered a la Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion to hold us over to the next game, but it takes place long after the events that are supposed to occur in Part 3, so it would be kinda confusing and spoilery for new players. I doubt it'll happen, but in my opinion, this trilogy is still a remake. It still clearly expects you to already know the story going in, and Dirge of Cerberus has never been playable on anything except the PlayStation 2, meaning it's basically inaccessible today outside of piracy. Just remaster the dang thing, guys, it's not that big a deal. The actual reason they won't do it is probably out of shame. It's one of the worst reviewed Final Fantasy games ever and plays nothing like Remake or Crisis Core. But that's exactly why I want to see it happen. So yeah, him and Cid just kind of follow you at a distance in the last act of the game. They don't even fight like Red did at the end of Remake. But it looks like Part 3 is going to start with the full squad. Sounds overwhelming. I wonder how they're going to handle that. And that's all I can really say without spoiling. For the next chapter of this video, we're going to go over specific story moments, mostly ones that were changed from the original telling or involved the new meta-narrative in some way. Big ATS time. Get ready. Now, the details of the original game are hazy at this point since I only played it once 3 years ago, but not for stuff like, the Nibelheim incident, which gets repeated in almost every spin-off. So when Sephiroth slices Tifa's chest open with his sword, I was a little confused. We see Cloud's reaction to this and he clearly thought she died. Cloud, like the player, is struggling to see what's real and what's not, and this is a major theme throughout the game. So when we're back in present day, he denies that this even happened and that Tifa might be an imposter until she lifts her shirt to show him the scar. This gets the two of them off to a rocky start. Conveniently, the player never gets to see the scar, so I wasn't sure what to think at this point. Sephiroth will use this and lean into it too, all like, "Ooh, don't let her fool you, Cloud." And when you reach Costa del Sol, I had almost forgotten about this whole thing, but when Tifa's walking around with all her gungagas out, after my investigation, I was like, wait a minute, where is that scar? The scar itself was actually referenced in the novel we discussed, Traces of Two Pasts. It's described much more gruesomely, like a huge slash across her whole chest, something that would possibly be visible even in her normal clothes. But in the game, when she shows Cloud, she lifts the bottom of her shirt up just so, making it seem like, it's right there. But that area's pretty visible with her bikini. So, Tifa, are you really Tifa? It got me questioning. I've seen some discussion about this online and most conclude that we don't see the scar in that scene simply because it's an in-game cutscene using in-game models and they couldn't really animate that without a lot of work. I assume that was likely the case, but the problem is just from a storytelling and direction standpoint, it's really fishy that they hide it from us. Like the game intentionally wants to confuse us about what is and isn't real, but in this one case, it's not intentional. That's kind of hard to sell me on. Then at the beach, they don't even have that excuse. This is a different model for Tifa, the bikini model. They could have just added the scar there. Now we have to assume that the scar is literally on her boob. Sephiroth is truly evil. Either way, the lore is inconsistent with the book. What a weird situation. I don't know what to think. It's either game development excuses and cover-ups, or Tifa is an imposter. It's kind of a big jump. Anyway, back to the beginning. At the Calm Inn, Tifa confides in Aerith that Cloud wasn't being entirely truthful and accurate about that whole situation he described, which I think was a good addition. Otherwise, she's just holding pretty vital information away from the rest of the party. So the party is looking at Cloud with concerned eyes for most of the adventure. There will be multiple points of the story where he sees Sephiroth around, but the others don't. Perhaps the first major instance where this might ruin the moment for some is in the swamp area. In the original game, this Midgar Zalam is roaming the area, making it near impossible to pass without dodging via chocobo. The cool thing is you can fight him, it's just very hard. He'll destroy you if you're new to the game. And little did you know when you first played it, this is all just a setup to make you fear the real enemy even more. If you haven't played Final Fantasy VII, you still may know this screen with the monster impaled on the tree covered in blood. Did Sephiroth do this? This monster that was such a struggle for us to get to, did he just slay it like it was nothing? And did he leave it here specifically to strike fear into us? This image stuck with me. Something about the low resolution still made it more creepy. But this is Rebirth. Gotta go bigger. I don't know what a Midgar Zalam is, but screw that. We're fighting Midgard Sormer, and it's a giant epic boss fight that ends with Sephiroth showing up and killing him right in your face. Here's a prime example of the issues that come with being overindulgent. Show don't tell, right? Remake already kind of killed the mystery that was Sephiroth. He was no longer this menace that loomed over you unseen, because they had to shove him into every place they could for him to talk about how mysterious he was. It doesn't hit the same. Seeing him slay this beast in a flashy anime style does not hit the same as discovering it like we did in the original. I totally understand the disappointment fans have with this situation now. They want to make Sephiroth so cool, like he was to everyone when they were kids. But as we know, when you try so hard to be cool, that makes you not cool. What was cool was the extension of the dolphin sequence, including a minigame around it I mentioned earlier. I also enjoyed the occasional check-in with Yuffie before she officially joins the party, particularly when she tries to assassinate the president. I loved the Bald Bar, a bar for bald people only, where you can find Rude hanging out. It was given an extended cutscene in Rebirth, which was, in my opinion, well deserved. I love the extended Escape from Junon sequence where you command a squad of Shinra troopers while under a disguise, and they grow attached to you over this quick little segment and salute you on your way down the elevator. That was so awesome. Fan favorite character Roche makes a return as well. He pops up a few times to mess with you. Wasn't sure if his inclusion was going to lead to something or not. Doesn't seem like it is. He ends up getting juiced with the Sephiroth cells and becoming one of those roaming robed guys. I guess the point of him was for the player to feel some sense of attachment to a character who would eventually suffer this fate, instead of all these guys just being nameless, cloaked clones you don't really care about. But I don't know, I wasn't crying for Roche. Also, apparently the black robe just magically appears on you when this happens. I found no explanation for why they all get black robes instantly in a poof. It just happens, I guess. Nomura strikes again. How about some juicier stuff though? Let's talk whispers. They are surprisingly absent here, as I said, only appearing in a handful of scenes, specifically with Sephi. That's because they belong to him now. They were once trying to keep Fate on a certain path in the last game, but by defeating the Harbinger of Fate, we allowed Sephiroth to take control of them. So now they're basically just his little henchmen. And the White Whispers are now here, acting as the planet's retaliation against them. They take the role kind of that the Black Whispers once had in Remake, trying to keep the story as it was in the original 7, while Sephiroth uses the Fate Ghosts to do something else. But if you hate this Fate Ghost nonsense, you'll be glad to see they are pretty far from the spotlight in this game. The one who is in the spotlight of Rebirth's meta-narrative is Zack Fair, the guys on the cover of the game. Perhaps the biggest twist of Remake was showing Zack defy his famous Last Stand scene where he was meant to die. And also Biggs too, I guess. Rebirth follows up on this immediately with the opening scene of the game where Aerith dies. Aerith dies in the opening scene. Well, okay, this is an alternate timeline, but it sets the tone. They know that Aerith's death at the temple is the center of everyone's mind right now, and they're gonna mess with you about it the whole time. These playable Zack sections serve as an occasional interlude between certain chapters where you take care of Aerith and Cloud after they barely survive the reactor incident. And you run into this new version of Biggs, who's a little bit edgier and more existential. Like all of the new story stuff in this trilogy, I'm just kind of thinking, where is this going the whole time? It's cool to see Zack do more stuff, but these sections are mostly AAA prestige walking and talking sections. I thought it would lead to Zack joining the adventure or something crazy. I mean, the guy's on the cover of the game, but it never quite goes anywhere? I guess not yet. Like I said, the most surprising thing about Rebirth's story is how faithful it sticks to the beats of the original. There are moments where it seems Aerith and Cloud can see into that timeline and there is a payoff at the end, but let's save that for later. By the way, they don't even spend a second explaining who Zack is, what he does, why he's here, nothing at all. They were basically like, hey, we remastered Crisis Core. If you didn't play it then, that's on you. Speaking of Crisis Core, Gongaga is now a huge region, and not just a little village. And there you'll find another Crisis Core character, Cisne, aka Shuriken. This is a cool addition. We never followed up with her, except in Before Crisis, I guess. She's now the leader of the Gongaga Youth Coalition, except it's just an undercover front for her to watch the nearby reactor, cause, of course, she's still a Turk. Once you get Sid to fly you out of there, you end up in Cosmo Canyon with some big changes centered around Red 13. Let's talk about Red 13. I think what they did to Red 13 is downright terrible. I think it's character assassination. I have complaints about Rebirth, but there's only one thing that made me actually upset. One thing I genuinely hate. And it's not organizing materia. It's this.
You can let them through. They're good people. I promise.
What in the hell was that?
One could say I know a thing or two about our world.
A thing or two? I doubt there's a thing or two you don't know about it.
Well, it might seem that way to a child like yourself.
I'm not a child anymore. I'm 48.
40 what?
So let's go over this. The twist with Red 13 has always been that he's actually a young boy, for his species at least. I remember this being revealed, but I don't remember Red changing his persona much at all, so this moment threw me for a loop completely. Obviously, there's no voice acting in Final Fantasy VII. Did I just misinterpret him this drastically? Well, no. The English version of the game apparently just doesn't communicate this super well, and he mostly maintains the same demeanor. In Japanese, it's very clear. It's a hard left turn in this character's writing style down to a switch between formal and informal pronouns. So basically half the audience was surprised and uncomfortable with this, and the other half was completely expecting it, wondering how they would do it. I'm in the former party. The simple reasoning is just that, man, he's so annoying now. Like, alright, he can change his voice. That's not a big deal. Why is his entire personality different, though? This isn't a complaint about faithful remake accuracy. I didn't play Final Fantasy VII in Japanese. I just think this story decision is bad in both games. And it probably works better without voice acting. Red was cool. He brought a wise stoicism to the group dynamic and was knowledgeable about these scary ghosts that kept bothering us. That's knowledge that very few people have. But later in Rebirth, those same ghosts show up and he's all like, "Yikes! Cloud, help me! This Sephiroth guy's a weirdo, right? Oh yeah, gotta go fast!" It is such a drastic difference, it's unbelievable. This can't be the same person. If you're gonna do a twist like this, you need to have him drop the act every now and then, or get caught faking it in a situation where only an adult would know what to do. But that never happens because he actually knows everything that an adult knows and more, because Red 13 is an adult. Naneki is a child. They're two completely different personalities. And from this point on, he acts almost exclusively like a kid. It felt like the character I knew died right there in the most anticlimactic way possible. As an old, stoic, serious man, when he dressed up in Shinra uniform and stood on two legs just to compete in a card tournament, that was funny. But when you tell me actually that was a kid doing that, it just becomes not as funny anymore. But that is some impressive voice range. Apparently it's the same voice actor for both young and old sounding Red. That's my take on that. If you disagree, I'm sorry. Whatever, like, to each their own. There are a few more important new story elements in this chapter, like the extended sequence of the G presence in Cosmo Canyon. The G was an ancient tribe who lived on this planet around the same time as the Cetra, but I don't remember there being very much lore about them. Rebirth expands their history by showing us where they came from. Space. They came to the planet after theirs was destroyed and started ruining the Cetra's lives. They were jealous of the Cetra's deep, entangled relationship with the planet and the life stream. You see, the G would not enter that river of souls when they died because they aren't native to the planet. So death truly meant death for them, being gone for good. They basically said, wow, that's unfair, so we're gonna make you die forever too, and that's where the black materia came from. The big MacGuffin of Rebirth's story that's meant to summon Meteor and destroy the planet so the Cetra can die forever. The plan didn't quite work out because the Cetra stole it and hid it in a secret temple, the very same one that sets up Rebirth's finale. So this all started with a race of invaders just hating another race so much that they decided to destroy a whole planet. And when it didn't work, the G just stewed in their bitterness for thousands of years until they try to trick our heroes into bringing it back to them. The jury's still out on the results of that, given the game's cryptic ending, but yeah, the G seem like a bunch of losers. Another big surprise addition to the lore was a new character appearing in some cutscenes back at Shinra.
I thought you were dead.
Then you thought right.
Oh no, is what I said to myself out loud alone in my living room when I saw Glenn Lodbrok show up through an Organization 13 portal wearing an Organization 13 robe. If you didn't know, this guy is from Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis First Soldier Episode 1, the mobile gacha game I reviewed on the show a few months back. Tying a huge franchise game like this into a mobile game that is going to die one day is certainly a choice, and one they've made before. See pivotal sequence during the end of Kingdom Hearts 3 that requires knowledge of a mobile game that as of today is completely dead and removed from the App Store. The mobile game is gone forever, but Kingdom Hearts 3 lives on, and that moment in the game lives on forever and just gets more confusing for new players as time goes on. So I already know this is going to be a bad decision, but what does Glenn do here? Almost nothing. It's just a few cutscenes between him and Rufus where he talks vaguely about war with Wutai and he starts mocking Rufus for that time he killed him. Rufus kills Glenn at some point. I guess we have to look forward to that in Ever Crisis. It's all clearly just set up for something they have planned for Part 3. It's like a warning shot for fans who haven't played it yet. Nomura's like, you know what's gonna be relevant next time. I don't want any complaints, you better play Ever Crisis before Part 3. Do we even think Ever Crisis will last until the next game? My personal prediction is that it'll ride the hype for that game, but will probably die about a year after it comes out. But that's still an above average lifespan for a gacha game, especially a Square Enix one, so it might be even earlier. During Rebirth's ending sequence, it's shown that Sephiroth was using one of his clones to project an image of Glenn this whole time, just to sow the seeds of war. So does that mean the real Glenn is dead? I don't know, but we definitely haven't seen the last of him. Especially because as we get more story, the theory that Glenn is secretly Cloud's dad seems more and more likely. Altering the main character's backstory to give him a dad who only stars in a gacha game is pretty shameful, but I do believe this is going to be the case. How that will change the story, I do not know, but get ready for some Han Solo level nonsense explaining the origins of Cloud Strife's last name. I used to be Cloud Lodbrok, but then I went through all this strife and I changed my name to Strife. It's gonna be some stupid crap like that. Oh, and the other new characters from First Soldier, Matt and Lucia, are somewhat present too. They don't appear in the game, but are mentioned by name during the flashback found within the Cosmo Canyon Proto-Relic quests. I'm gonna chalk that up to just being a reference because I really doubt they're gonna appear in the story and be relevant. Now, for this last bit, I want to dive into Rebirth's controversial ending. One we knew would be controversial before this game was properly announced. Before they even told us the story would be cut off at the most important and recognizable moment in Final Fantasy VII. After tracking down the Black Materia and encountering Sephiroth, Cait Sith dies but immediately comes back, and Aerith goes to the Forgotten City to pray. The second to last chapter is an action-packed dungeon at the Temple of the Ancients and featured one of my favorite fights in the game, the Demon Wall. who spawns another version of himself on the other side and starts closing in on you. It was stressful as hell. It was really great. There was also a lot of collecting these little sparks as Aerith so she can dance like Yuna to make paths for us. Cloud goes full Seth mode for a second, as he tends to do, but he snaps out of it, and there's a trial for each character to go through as a wrap-up to whatever their arc was. Each trial is a flashback to a traumatic moment that shaped them. Aerith goes back to her childhood, the moment she escaped Shinra and had to leave her mom behind, running through the slums, shouting for help, and being ignored until meeting Elmira. This is another scene copied almost verbatim from Traces of Two Pasts. Sung gets stabbed but comes back right away, kind of like what happened to Barrett in Remake. What's the point of doing this? Is this going to be a thing? Who's going to die in the next game and then not die? Then there's more cryptic meta stuff where the temple says you must remake the... and stuff, and then Sephiroth goes on about their reunion of worlds. But that actually technically happens during the final boss, the reunion of two separate worlds we've been checking in on, our world and Zack's world. The whole thing was basically an excuse to bring Zack and Cloud together for an epic battle as part of the traditional, very long, multi-phase final boss. Zack has a unique playstyle that lets you charge up moves by holding still or quickly hitting the triangle after a combo. At level 3, these attacks are probably the hardest hitting moves in the game, so he's super fun to play. But after the fight, he gets sent back to that other world before Cloud even has a chance to talk with him. Obviously, there's still more to their story that we haven't reached as far as the original timeline goes, but that moment did not feel like it paid off any speculation we had about Zack and his alternate timeline. They are putting all their mystery eggs into one basket, and that's why Rebirth's story sort of lacks structure. It just keeps things going. It doesn't answer much at all. And you know, Aerith dies or whatever, or she doesn't, but actually she does. And after you go on a date with her anyway in the other timeline where she died before but she's alive now, and you fight the final boss with her and then she dies, but that was all just a vision. She's alive, but not really, she's dead, like actually for real dead, but she's alive. In Cloud's mind, the end.
I won't say that it was fair.
Oh my god. Alright, I have to be honest. That sucked. They fake you out like 3 times. Seth comes crashing down and Cloud blocks the attack. Oh, but that was another timeline. Then she's seen dying in Cloud's arms and he's like, oh no, Aerith, wake up, wake up. But she appears right next to him like, what do you mean? I'm right here. Oh, that was an alternate timeline. It just keeps going on like that through the entire final boss sequence. Going in wondering if they were going to commit to her death or not, this stressed me the hell out. I just wanted to know if she was going to make it. The developers knew every fan was going to be wondering the same thing, and they used this opportunity to toy with them, to torture them. I guess on the other hand, it's the closest I've ever related to how Cloud feels when Sephiroth puts those visions in his head. That was probably the intended effect. Done successfully, for sure, but at what cost? One of the most famous moments in gaming, losing all of its weight. I felt nothing here. Except confusion, I guess. They overthought the heck out of it when everyone would have been perfectly happy with a faithful recreation, which this game is mostly full of. I'd be okay with the idea of going on this date with Aerith in the dream world as we're frozen in time and finishing the fight with her, one last battle, giving us a chance to properly say goodbye. But in these moments, I was just confused and frustrated. Even when the credits rolled, I was wondering, what are we supposed to get out of this conclusion? If you didn't know anything about the original, if you somehow never knew of her fate, this ending probably feels incredibly rushed. It kind of feels that way even with knowing. I'm just like, do you want me to be sad or not? I seriously can't figure out if this girl is dead or not until the very last cutscene where the answer is yes, but also kind of not really. So I'm left just feeling a little indifferent. She is dead, but there are other timelines where she isn't. So I guess that might be something we try to fix in the next game. She's seen walking among all of the characters as they sit around in the final cutscene being sad, but none of them can see her except for Cloud. But they all get on the plane and leave her behind, and that's the final shot where with her like saying goodbye. So like, is that a commitment to saying we are really leaving Aerith behind? Because I seriously doubt that. The fact that Cloud can see her makes me think she's going to be popping up in the next game. Kind of like how Sephiroth does. And I don't want that. That's not going to be interesting. That's not going to be scary. It's not going to be sad. I'm just going to be like, ugh. Just be dead if you're going to be dead, you know? It's never going to feel like she's fully gone, so we're never going to be upset like we should be. Like when Aerith died in the original game, that was a party member we did not have. But now, Part 3 is just going to be a game where she's not playable, probably, and she's not going to be playable from the beginning, so it's not like you're losing anything in that instance, but also she's going to be popping up in the story. I just know it, so it's just... You lost me with that whole thing. The ending of Remake left me with a lot of questions and excitement about the true adventure ahead. The ending of Rebirth felt like things were pretty clear, and the next game will likely just be more of this. In that final cutscene, as everyone is mourning the loss of a dear friend and uncertain about the future, Cid has one of the best lines in the game.
So, what Aerith actually do anyway?
And nobody has an answer for him. I feel like this ending very much fulfills the fear many of us had. Remake's story, as much as it embellished in itself, feels pretty complete on its own. Rebirth stops in the middle of an adventure as if you were watching a movie and pressed pause, just to unpause it in about 4 years. It's what a lot of Hollywood movies like to do these days. My prediction is the third game will be more plot-light adventuring until they unleash all the answers at you in the third act, where the pacing will go at Mach speed, similar to what they did in Kingdom Hearts 3. The biggest tease we're left with isn't even about Aerith. It's about how Cloud kept the black materia and absorbed it with his weapon, which is not what happens in the original, though I have a feeling it's just going to end up getting into Sephiroth's hands anyway. I don't really know, but I'm not left with much of a desire to speculate as I was last time, and that's a little disappointing. Maybe in the context of the full trilogy, I'll view this ending differently. Maybe Aerith won't actually show up at all in the third game, but I would bet so much money that that's not going to be the case. This being the last note to ponder on for the time being, just leaves me lukewarm. I said in my remake review that the worst case scenario for Aerith's death will be doing it, but then revealing it was a fake out, and then they bring her back at the start of Part 3. They didn't quite do that, but they did fake us out several times and basically already brought her back, but only partially. So they veered on the edge of worst case scenario for me. I gushed so much about how much I love this game, and I made sure to preface at the beginning of the story section that, hey, whatever I think about the story doesn't really matter, and because that's true. This part was really disappointing, but it didn't take away from how much I loved everything else, and again, it's gonna be viewed differently when Part 3 comes out, so I'm still holding out for that. Moving on, since this review is trying to be as overindulgent as possible in honor of the game, for the first time in REFFOID, I'm going to be reviewing the post-game and talking about the 100%ing process. There isn't a slew of brand new stuff to see. Most of the side content has conclusions of their own, which we've talked about, the Gilgamesh Proto-Relic quests and the Queen's Blood Champion. Almost everything you do rewards you with something to display in Johnny's 7-star hotel in Costa del Sol. Unironically, one of the coziest spots in the game, at least after you help him fix it up. Its purpose doubles as a museum for all your accomplishments, medals, play arts figures, a cardboard cutout of Rufus, and only once you collected everything can you open Johnny's secret box. This is when you decide to go back to pick things up you missed and maybe replay each chapter on the returning hard mode. Hard mode was really cool in Remake. No items and no MP recovery meant you were playing survival in each chapter. Rebirth doesn't change hard mode, but since this game's structure is so different, the challenge is all over the place. Replaying chapters with all your quest data retained means you're free to jump anywhere you need to be. Some chapters can be wrapped very quickly, while other dungeon-y chapters are much harder than the ones that were in Remake. But on the other hand, with potentially 7 party members, that's a lot more MP to go around. You just might have to give everyone a turn playing if you're being liberal with magic. Hard mode at its best is intense, stressful, and rewarding. But I avoided replaying most chapters until I unlocked the legendary Götterdämmerung, which makes a triumphant return. This is the item that grants full limit break at the start of every fight, allowing you to clear most enemies instantly or take a large chunk out of a boss right away. It's just as fun as it was before, but getting it might be even harder. Enter Chadley's Brutal Simulator, featuring many endurance challenges. 10 rounds each, all of them bosses, and you must build one team to attempt the full gauntlet. Man, I thought I had this system figured out, but the brutal challenges were humbling to say the least. I was pulling my hair out trying to get through most of them. Each batch of 10 rounds is like 30 minutes, so every attempt is an investment. Losing on round 8 and getting to the game over screen showing how much time you just wasted is very discouraging. Challenge is challenge. However, my big issue here is it relies a lot on what materia you've chosen to bring with you. I mean, that's the core of the character building, of course, but it doesn't tell you what each fight is, so how am I supposed to know what to bring? There's only so many materia slots. I gotta make sure each one is useful. I can't just bring the same generally good build to every fight because that doesn't work. It wouldn't be a very good system if it did. So I'll admit, I eventually caved and looked up other people's builds to copy them. It actually made for a fun additional challenge. I still didn't know what each fight was gonna be or how to use the materia, but I knew I had a good build for it. So I just needed to figure out exactly what made it good. After the brutal challenges, there's a solo challenge for each character, a little more manageable to build on your own. I got a new appreciation for Red 13's combat. Vengeance mode is so powerful, and he's really fun to make work on his own. I saw the opposite with Cait Sith. Man, he feels bad to play. Cait Sith without the Moogle basically means you're on a doom timer, because the enemy is just gonna crap all over you and there's nothing you can do about it. Equipping something that starts you with 1 ATB bar at the start is practically a requirement, so you can send Moogle off to distract the enemy. But he also just might not do that. You don't control him, so if the enemy wants you instead, he'll get you. And if you don't have an ATB ready to spawn Moogle again once he dies, same deal, you're just dead. Cait builds ATBs so damn slowly with his stupid little projectiles, and he's got so few useful abilities when he's not mounted on Moogle. So his playstyle is run away and shoot while you wait. Always keep 1 ATB stored, and when you get the second one, hop on the Moogle real quick, do something useful, and hop off. Is he a damager? Is he a support? He's kinda neither. Even if he's got some heavy attacks, he can't do anything that the others can't do with much less effort. Like Aerith's a healer. So how come her solo battle sim was easier than Cait Sith? I guess Cait Sith is just silly, and that's all he needs to be. But doing a solo run with him is awful. Anyway, for doing all that, the final unlock is a couple of duo battle sims, Cloud with Zack and Cloud with Sephiroth. This was a great idea, taking the guest characters meant for only a single segment at the beginning or end of the game, but now having to actually apply their style with strategy was so much fun. Their moves are just as overpowered as they were, but so are these bosses, putting Cloud in more of a support role. They also come with a pre-built set of spells you can't change, which means your Cloud build needs to change to complement them. It's a different approach to all the other fights, and they did not frustrate me as much. These battles, though still tough, felt more like a victory lap after everything we've been through. And it was all worth it when I got to Gotor Damarung everything to death. There were still some other accessories to unlock though. The recipes for Genji equipment you unlock from the Proto Relic questline are only obtainable on hard mode. It requires you revisiting some mini-bosses for exclusive materials. I wouldn't say the equipment is that great. I'm certainly not choosing them over Gotor Damarung. But you gotta craft each of them to get max level in your item transmuter. And I had to know what happens when I get max level in my item transmuter. Nothing happens. Absolutely nothing happens. So yeah, the one last trophy I needed was to beat everything on hard mode and repeat chapter 12 to get all the dates. I think they took player feedback to heart because repeating this is much easier than repeating chapter 9 in Remake was to see all the dresses. That basically required you to do an entire dungeon just to get up to that part, and you had to make sure you answered the questions in the previous chapters correctly in the first, and then do a certain amount of side quests. It's such a huge slog, and you could tell since it's the rarest non-DLC achievement on both Steam and PlayStation. More people have beaten the final secret super bosses than they have seen the dresses. Other completionist things to do are sailing the Meridian Ocean to try and find all the pirate jetsams. There is a set amount of them in specific spots, so you need to play needle in a haystack to find them all. Otherwise, you won't be able to transmute all the Genji equipment, which, as we learned, is not worth it at all. Then you gotta make sure you wrapped up all your side quests, you gotta make sure you've bonded with every character, you gotta make sure you've played the hard mode versions of all the mini games and the piano playing, mostly topics that we've already covered. Then when you decide to do hard mode, you're in for a lot. Chapter 13 in particular was hellish. It's like the longest chapter in the game, it's all on rails, and there's so many bosses. Trying to keep your MP up that whole time was really tough. The final boss with 7 phases is a huge endurance challenge. I was losing all of my magic by the end. I was using every last bit, squeezing it out. At least before I figured out how to have infinite magic. Technically, there is a trick to it. And it's one thing that's really going to help if you decide to do hard mode or any of Chadley's stupid brutal challenges. MP absorption materia. It allows you to absorb MP when using a magic spell equal to a certain amount depending on the damage you do. So if you upgrade it all the way, I think you're going to get 0.3%, which does not sound like a lot, but if you use the biggest attack you can, like a Firaga or a Blizzaga or a Thundaga, you can actually get a net gain of MP by using it. What you do is you equip multiple versions of that spell. So you equip fire to the MP absorption, and then you also equip another fire to magic focus, which boosts its power. So if you're boosting its power all the way but keeping it the same price and also adding this absorption modifier, you gain MP for using magic. It's incredible. And then of course you got Aerith throwing the arcane ward on there, so you're casting it twice. You're like filling up your MP bar every time you use a big attack. You're losing nothing. This is where the Genji gloves might actually come into play. They remove the damage cap so you can go above 9999. So if you can do that, you're absorbing even more MP and killing the boss. So that was a big trick. Aerith in general, man, I seriously don't know what I'm gonna do without her. These wards that she can set up to make everyone go crazy. She also is the only character in the game who has a move that just straight up absorbs MP for herself. So if you make her the magic damage dealer, or no, you make somebody else the magic damage dealer, so that they're absorbing MP and getting like infinite MP, but also Aerith is getting infinite MP from her ability, you have 2 of your 3 characters who don't need to worry about the NP problem that hard mode brings. It's great. And I don't feel bad using it because it's not like it kills the challenge that the amount of damage that the bosses do and the difficulty it is to fight them all. But it's also just really fun and satisfying to do, so I don't really mind. And also, you gotta factor in the synergy ability that gives you infinite MP actually for a temporary amount of time. Like, there are ways to get around it. But you gotta be good, you gotta know what you're doing. So, it's nice. There was another trick that did kind of feel a little cheesy that I learned when I was copying other people's builds online. Once again, Aerith is your total savior, and I do not know what I'll do without her. There's a new ward she has called ATB ward. I mentioned it very briefly because I didn't really use it until this post-game stuff. ATB ward is very small, but it's basically like if you use an ability within the ward, your other party members gain ATB. So it's a little way to boost what you're doing, but it's like practically using it in battle. I couldn't really see it unless I made sure every ability I used, I ran up to that little spot and used it. Like that would be an efficient way of doing it, but I never wanted to. I don't know, but the point is, this trick involves Yuffie. If you use Yuffie, she has this ability called Brumal Form that is like a ninjutsu kind of dodge thing. You know that thing that ninjas do where they disappear into smoke and there's like a little wooden thing where they were. I don't know what that's called, but that's basically what it is. She can dodge and attack with it. You can equip her with ATB assist materia or something. I forget which one it exactly was. It's one of the purple materias where it's like if you use the ability enough, it reduces the ATB cost, or if you use it enough times, it boosts your ATB, so it gains you ATB for using this move. You have another character throw haste on her in combination with that materia. You equip her with First Strike and basically every ATB related thing you can. Anything that boosts ATB, anything that reduces its cost, and then you give her haste on top of that. So now, when you use Brumal Form within the ATB ward, you basically don't lose ATB. at all. I don't even really understand why, but that's how it goes. And because you're using that move in the ward, it gives ATB to everybody else. Therefore, you have infinite ATB. You can just spam this move in this ward and everybody will max out ATB instantly. As long as you keep haste on Yuffie and the boss doesn't smack you out of that little circle or anything. So it's not like a freebie, it's not a total cheat. Trust me, I've died many times even trying to use this trick, but it's still a crazy trick. It's like game breaking. You combine the infinite magic trick with the infinite ATB trick and you've broken this game. But it really speaks to the difficulty of these damn brutal challenges that I can still die doing both of them. I made sure to save my game after every failure, every attempt, so that my final gameplay time would be truly accurate because I didn't want to return to old save files or anything when I died. I wanted to make sure the final count was correct. And although I didn't just get the platinum, I did a little extra stuff like maxing out the item transmuter and doing more bond things and other extra completionist things I didn't technically need to do. But yes, my final hour count was 183. According to How Long to Beat, this is above average, which makes sense, but I don't know how accurate everyone's being. There are a lot of people way higher than me who they must have done like every little thing, checked off every tiny box, got all the manuscripts and stuff. It's kind of hard to tell. I can't truly tell you how long this is going to be, but that's just how long it took me. With the extra stuff I did, 183. This was insane. And with all of Chadley's brutal challenges dealt with, all of hard mode complete, we've done it. A platinum trophy that took 2.5 times as long as the one in Remake. What the heck are we going to be asked to do in part 3? Actually, recently, the developers had an interview and they said, hey, maybe we made platinum trophy a little too hard. We're going to reduce the requirements for the next one. Which is fine with me. But they also said they would reduce the amount of mini-games following complaints from certain gamers. Oh my gosh, how disappointing is that? The minigame haters won. Hey, minigame haters, I would love to hear why you hate them so much. Why do you hate fun? Why are you doing this to me? It's fine, it's fine. As long as we get some minigames, I'll be happy. Anyway, we're done. Okay, Johnny, what's in the box you made me work so hard for? Worth it. And that's the last reward you can possibly reap in this game. Max level characters, max party level, max item transmute level, all weapon folios, all Chadley intelligence, all Johnny items, platinum trophy. Though, for my own personal reasons, I have one last thing I want to do. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what do I even say at this point? I have reviewed every Final Fantasy game. The playable ones, at least. And it took way longer than I thought it would. Even when we broke the deadline, like February 29th was supposed to be it, I was like, okay, it's just gonna be a few more months. Bro, it's Christmas. But I'll leave my thoughts on that whole project for later. For now, we just need to come up with some kind of conclusion for the middle part of this trilogy and the unknown future of the series. The video game industry is going through big changes right now as the AAA, huge budget, 5+ year dev cycle game bubble feels like it might finally be bursting. I've heard some concerned fans wonder if Rebirth sold well enough for Square to still go through with Part 3. I don't think things are nearly that dire. Also, Rebirth sold very well. Those people are misinterpreting Square's unrealistic expectations. It's one of the best-selling games, let alone PS5 exclusives, of the year. It's just that they need to make so much more money than even that to be totally comfortable. And that's why this is a bubble. But 7 is stronger than just about every other main line put together, except maybe 14. There's no reason to be afraid of them not being able to make another Final Fantasy VII game. Final Fantasy 17 is in more jeopardy than that, and the games will no doubt get more popular as Square moves away from console exclusivity, something they should have done a long time ago but will only start putting into practice in the future. I'd like to see Sony actually have to carry their own console now. But how will this new philosophy affect the games? Will Part 3 launch on Xbox 360? But really, will it launch on Xbox and PlayStation and PC at the same time? Will it launch on Switch 2 at all? The part of me that's pro-exclusive is thinking, will it be as polished? Will it come out as fast? Because all things considered, Rebirth came out very fast. Believe it or not, there's only one mainline Final Fantasy that has ever launched on multiple consoles, and it was 15. Not the most comforting example. My prediction for Part 3 is that it'll be more of the same open world traveling through the last few areas that we know with the same detail and charm that carried me through this game. Though I honestly remember that portion of the original 7 even less than Rebirth's. There's Rocket Town, there's the Snowy Mountain area, there's Wutai, which I'm sure will have a huge extension. There's like the underwater reactor dungeon and the northern crater finale. It kind of feels like the most iconic imagery of Final Fantasy VII was packed into these first two. I hope Part 3 can manage to reach the heights of its predecessors. Though, now that I think about it, isn't the rest of the story beyond those areas going back to the old areas? That's interesting. They could get away with not having Midgar accessible in Rebirth. The party has absolutely no reason to go back throughout this story, but there are important things that happen in the last third of Final Fantasy VII in multiple areas we've already visited. The devs have a much greater challenge ahead of them to figure out how to do that without disappointing players. Because if Re 3 ended up smaller than Rebirth, that would be kind of lame. But if you go back to Corel, for one thing, they can't justify giving you the whole open world map to re-explore. I think it's likely that Re 3 will stick out against the other two by feeling a bit incomplete due to its unique reliance on old areas. But there's a non-zero chance that they just say screw it and make the next game twice the size of this game. I'm not getting my hopes up, but this trilogy has done some crazy stuff already. I also believe the story will stick with how Rebirth handled moments mostly faithfully, but the ending will be so ridiculous and it will make so many people so angry. I mean, that happened with Part 1, but we could kind of shrug off that whole sequence. You can't really shrug off what they did in Part 2, and I feel like Part 3, being the end, is really gonna go crazy. Now, I had my problems with Rebirth's story, more problems than I did with Remake, but I have to acknowledge that those problems come from the same place all the good stuff comes from. This trilogy, I said it multiple times, it's defined by the way it indulges so much in itself. That's kind of the thesis of this analysis I'm doing here. There's no other game doing it like this. Plenty of games have their huge fanfare moments of spectacular cutscenes or grand displays of vast environments to make the player go ooh, or ah, or you see that mountain? You can walk there. And Rebirth has those moments for sure, but I'm talking about when the game drops the act. And instead of saying, hey, isn't this so cool? Dude, isn't this part so badass, bro? It instead asks, hey, isn't this fun? Isn't this just like a silly good time? And depending on the type of gamer you are, the answer might be, no, God, stop trying to make me play cards, I don't care. But for me, it feels like there's a drought, an immense need for AAA games to have charm again. We need more games where its first priority is to be fun, because if it's not fun, why bother? Rebirth, in some way, does feel like something Nintendo might make if they ever once thought to make a cinematic story game with characters who have actual depth. As many have said, it's got that PS2 energy. I always try to figure out what people mean when they say that. Like, I understand it, but it's hard to explain. PS2 was the peak of everyone experimenting with their franchises and getting weird, having fun with it before we hit that 1080p wall of the PS3, where gaming got serious and they started wanting to be movies. And Nintendo went in the complete opposite direction by saying, yeah, we're doing 480, and you're gonna waggle. We're gonna make it fun whether you like it or not. And thus there was this imbalance in the universe. Nintendo going all in on weird gimmicks and going too far with it a lot of the times, and everybody else just trying to have better graphics and bigger maps than each other. And that's what got us into this bubble. It really was the PS2 era that was that perfect middle ground where games just gave it their all. But that attitude isn't fully gone, because we still get games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So much of this game is just hanging out. It's such a chill, fun time. The pacing is so relaxed, like Remake, but where Remake could feel fillery to some, there was so much more to build off of in Rebirth that I don't see how you could find it fillery. Maybe it wasn't fun to you to spend that much time in the slums just to move to the next chapter, which is spending more time in a different slum. But in Rebirth, after spending hours in just one area, say Costa del Sol, when the game finally said it was time to move on, I was genuinely sad. I had the same feeling I had getting on the plane to go back home after vacation. I just wished I could spend more time there. Except the game wasn't sending me home to my boring adult 5-day work week life. It was sending me to a literal theme park for a different vacation. The main story of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is like going on vacations after vacations, just you and your pals hanging. And who else is making games like that on this scale? Helps that they had a PS1 game to use as a base, though. Got me wondering how much of this game would actually exist if it wasn't based on an old PS1 game. Would Square Enix have come up with this game if they were starting from scratch and just trying to think of a new idea? Absolutely not. They wouldn't think to give you a red monster truck for one area of the game. They wouldn't build a whole bond system specifically to set up one Ferris wheel theme park date towards the end. They would not have Kate Sith. The most charming parts of Rebirth come from the developer's dedication to adapting everything they can and make it make sense with the game they're trying to make. And that's what makes it one of a kind. Or I guess the 3 games in this trilogy are one of a kind. We've all been watching the direction Final Fantasy has been going for the last decade or so. Less RPG, more cinematic. Less silly, more serious. And Rebirth is a testament to what the people have been begging for from them. The opposite of that. Just look at the contrast between this and 16. Released not even a year apart. Both huge, high-budget, tent-pole games in the same franchise. It's unbelievable. I mean, It's awesome that we can get the best of both worlds like this, but if I had to choose one, you know what I would go with. I'm imagining what Final Fantasy XVII could look like if they bring this type of energy to a brand new idea. We could be entering a Renaissance era in the next generation. Or this trilogy will be all we get of this kind, and they can only go this hard with it because it's based on a popular IP and it's reliable to sell, and we'll never really get anything like it again unless they just do another remake right after and they do Final Fantasy X or something. I mean, I wouldn't mind that. So, in conclusion, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth Game of the Year. I've reviewed every Final Fantasy game. I feel powerful. I feel like I could do anything as long as they give me 4 years. I have no words for the end of REFFOID other than thank you. Thank you to all who discovered this channel and decided to keep watching and not just click away because I look or sound stupid. If you've seen every episode of the show, you've spent multiple days with me just hanging out, discussing Final Fantasy ad nauseum. I hope it was as fun and interesting to you as it was fulfilling for me. And I feel like we've had a few of these goodbye segments before, and it's never really goodbye. There's so many points where this could have ended, and we got all the way to the end, baby, the real end. I kind of consider the final episode of REFFOID to be the remake review that came out on the very last second, the deadline, you know, where the series was meant to end. It fulfilled the prophecy of the series. And the rest that I've been uploading, the other episodes of this year, they've been like bonus. Post-game. It's been like post-game wrap-up, checking every box. I never intended for this channel to be a Final Fantasy channel. This was supposed to be an easy thing that I did on the side when I did my other bigger projects, but then these just became the big projects, and this channel became a Final Fantasy channel. And it can stay that way. There is limitless potential for digging into these 80 plus games deeper and deeper. You could dissect them forever. You can come up with all sorts of new ways to talk about each of them. But I don't know if I want to do that. I think I want to move on to other things. I have other video ideas that aren't Final Fantasy related that I've been just kind of stewing on. Some of them are like outdated, can't really make them anymore. But I just want to make more stuff. So if you're on board for more surprises, I hope you'll stick around to see them with me. But no matter what, Final Fantasy will remain a pillar of what this channel came to be. And it's a series I've grown to care for very deeply. So expect to see a couple bonus REFFOID episodes in the near future. I got a bunch of ideas for more little things I could sprinkle out, hopefully before the end of the year. Also, no matter what happens, where this channel goes or how busy life gets, I'll vow to make a REFFOID style review for every Final Fantasy game that comes out between now and RE3. Even if that's on the PS6, takes like 5 more years. Probably will. And if I'm still having fun cranking out videos by that point, then I'll probably continue doing that. So that's my vow. You can hold me to it. Even if the videos are like, for some reason my life gets so busy and I can only, record a selfie video talking about it, like unedited, I'll find a way to do it. But that's new games, not necessarily remasters, okay? If they upscale a game and give it new graphics and nothing else, I'll probably skip it. Except for 9 Remake. 9 Remake's coming. 9 Remake's real. It's coming soon. But that's all I got, man. That's the freaking end of REFFOID. Officially, the mainline series of REFFOID is over. It's over. I don't know what to do. Here's to the unknown journey. Please stick around with me as we figure out what it is. It's an exciting time. I liked that people could look at the chronology of Final Fantasy games and go like, oh, that one's probably next. You know, oh, I'm excited for that one. But now we're in this new era where you're not going to know what I'm cooking until the plate's hot. And hey, I don't know, maybe you won't be into whatever I'm going to talk about, some kind of weird thing in Mario. Maybe you don't care. But but if you do, it's going to be great. So stick around. We are doing new things. The journey's unknown, baby. And it continues. Fate does not defy us or whatever. I don't know. Played that bit into the ground, didn't I?